Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Seeing Astrid again caused Eric's mind to travel back to a simpler time. It was now 11 years in the past, 4 years before the awakening and Edda's betrayal. Eric and Edda were both 14 years old at this point. The icy wind of Kirkins in winter swept through the still bustling harbor, carrying with it the salty tang of the sea and distant echoes of what few hardy seagulls stayed in the north rather than migrate to the south. There was no sun in the sky, despite being midday, as Kirkins was currently at the start of its polar midnight phase, where the sun wouldn't return for at least 2 months. Instead, street lanterns and a twilight gloom lit up the harbor. Eric, his silver-gray hair tousled by the breeze, stood beside Edda as they looked out over the harbor crowd. His eyes, reflecting a timidity that would shock anyone who met him in later years, wandered over the crates and ropes that littered the docks. Edda, bright-eyed and brimming with excitement, tugged at his sleeve. "Come on, Eric. It's finally the time of year when we can meet up with Astrid again. Let's go find her." As vampires, Astrid and the community she lived in would usually go for supplies at night. Only during the polar midnight period would Astrid's mother agree to bring her here during the day. After all, before the awakening, vampires still had trouble staying under the sunlight. Despite Edda's enthusiasm, Eric looked a little reluctant. He didn't dislike Astrid per se. He just preferred spending time alone with the girl he loved instead. But he could never refuse Edda anything, especially not when her enthusiasm was as high as it was right now. So he put away his reluctance and gave Edda a timid smile before nodding. "Yeah, let's go." But before they could move, Eric was suddenly jumped from behind by a slightly older girl who tousled his hair with her fist and laughed loudly. "Looking for me, are ya?" Edda's face lit up at seeing her friend again after many months. They tried to meet up in between the polar midnight phases, but it was difficult and often didn't work out. Luckily, they could always stay in contact over the internet. "Astrid," she said happily and jumped in to hug Eric and Astrid at the same time, as Eric was still held hostage by the vampire girl. The younger Eric just closed his eyes and sighed, letting it happen, even if he was slightly annoyed. The fact was, Astrid was not only older, but also a vampire, which meant she had constant access to her full strength, while Eric would have to change to his werewolf form first. And it's not like he could show his wolf form in the middle of a busy dock filled with regular humans. Astrid continued to laugh as she rubbed Eric's head with her fist. "Edda, it's good to see you, girl." Finally, she and Edda let Eric go and stepped back a little. Astrid was a 16-year-old vampire with strawberry blonde hair, typical red vampire eyes, and pale skin. She was still growing, of course, but as a 16-year-old, her beauty was already apparent. Seeing the disgruntled look on Eric's face, Astrid chuckled sheepishly. "Sorry, buddy. I know you don't like that, but I can't help myself. It's good to see you." She pouted a little. "I wish you would respond to my messages a little more often. I missed you, you bastard." Eric sighed. Despite her behavior and the fact he preferred to hang with Edda alone, he did care for Astrid, even if it hadn't always been that way. Their little trio of friends had actually started from the basis of Eric and Astrid, rather than Astrid and Edda, as one might have expected. It all started 2 years ago, when Eric was 12 and Astrid was 14. Astrid was almost the complete opposite of Eric, a rabble-rouser and a troublemaker who loved to get into fights. The problem was her community had very few kids her own age. So, she naturally got intrigued when she heard from her mother about this shapeshifter kid from Frostvik who could win fights against people 2 or even 3 years older than him. So, as soon as the next polar midnight rolled around, she convinced her mother to arrange a meeting in Kirkins. Unfortunately for Astrid, it didn't exactly go as planned. Despite Eric's strength and skill, he didn't really enjoy fighting and only did it to appease his parents. But since nothing forced him to accept this random vampire girl's challenge, he simply ignored her. Yet, Astrid didn't give up so easily and, over the next month, continued to pester Eric, hoping he would finally accept. Eric naturally grew annoyed as Astrid seriously cut into the time he could spend with Edda. During this time, Etta tried to befriend Astrid but was wholly ignored, as the vampire girl was entirely focused on getting Eric to accept her challenge. Eventually, Eric decided it was better to accept the challenge and get it over with, so she would hopefully leave him alone. But, unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Eric managed to defeat Astrid despite being 2 years younger, and the vampire girl gained an obsession because of it. After that event, Eric found it entirely impossible to get rid of the vampire, so he reluctantly stopped resisting her friendship. Soon after that, Astrid and Etta became friends as well. Eric scratched his head awkwardly. Yes, sorry about that. You know how it is. First, you wait a little while to respond because you're busy with something. Then you procrastinate for some other reason, and eventually it just becomes too awkward to still respond. Then he smiled softly. But it's good to see you again, too, Astrid. Astrid, whose obsession with Eric had long since turned into a crush despite their age and racial difference, only heard the last part as she put her hands on her hips and laughed. Of course it is. Then, her eyes lit up with excitement as she asked the same question she always did when they saw each other again. You want to spar? At this point, for Astrid, the sparring was just as much about the fight as it was about spending time alone with Eric without Etta. But Eric realized none of this. In typical young boy fashion, his entire being was absolutely obsessed with one specific girl while ignoring any and all others. And that girl was Etta, not Astrid. Eric sighed, still not a particular fan of fighting. Come on, Astrid. We always do that, and it leaves Etta with nothing to do. How about we just walk around a little? Astrid pouted. Come on, just a quickie. Just like Eric, Astrid was a little clueless about some things. Some people walking by momentarily halted when they heard a 16-year-old girl mentioning a quickie. Still, they all decided it was none of their business and moved on. Etta, the only one not so clueless between the three of them, giggled at Astrid's choice of words before turning to Eric with a cheeky smile. Oh, just give her what she wants, Eric. Get to her hard, okay. I'll just watch from the side. Neither Astrid nor Eric understood what was so funny, but Astrid didn't care either as she cheered. Yeah, come on, let's go. She grabbed Eric's sleeve and, under his exasperated sigh, pulled him along to find their usual spot just outside the town. Unfortunately, along the way, they ran across a group of slightly older vampires, finally able to explore the town again during the daytime, who decided to cause trouble for the trio, particularly for the weak human girl with them. Seeing the malice and curiosity in their eyes, Eric tensed up and instinctively moved close to Etta when the group blocked their path. He may be timid, but he would protect Etta with his life if it came to that. Yet, he also knew he couldn't simply transform right now. They were in a relatively quiet area, but the risk was still high that a random human might see him. He ground his teeth in frustration as he thought of a way out. Sensing the rising tension, Etta clutched Eric's arm, her cheerful demeanor fading into apprehension, appearing aware of her vulnerability as the only human in the group. Astrid, however, stepped forward, her posture radiating confidence. Got a problem, jackass? She challenged, her strawberry blonde hair seeming like a fiery halo in the dim light. The leader of the opposite group, a tall, 16 or 17-year-old vampire with a sneering expression, looked them over. What's this? A little mixed gathering? You still hanging around with the mutt and the human? Astrid? Their group consisted of vampires from various communities. Still, their leader just so happened to be from the same village as Astrid. Astrid's eyes narrowed, and her voice was ice. They're my friends. More than I can say for you, you little shit. Already forgotten the last time I beat you up for thinking you could get handsy with me. The leader laughed, his gaze lingering on Etta. Come now, Astrid. Why protect a human? You're outnumbered here, and she's nothing but... Before he could finish, Astrid lunged forward, her vampiric speed a blur. She tackled him to the ground, her fists connecting with his face before the others could react. The rest of the group moved to intervene, but Astrid was a whirlwind of fury, her movements swift and precise. Eric still held back while holding on to Etta as he prepared to transform if there was no other choice. He felt a surge of admiration and fear for Astrid. He wasn't unhappy with himself, but sometimes he wanted to have that kind of determination. Suddenly, the fight ceased as quickly as it had begun. Astrid stood up, the leader of the vampire group, lying dazed and bloody on the ground. His companions, too late to save him, quickly helped him up as they cast wary glances at Astrid. Next time you talk about one of my friends like that, I'll rip your fangs out of your mouth and stuff them in your ass, Astrid hissed, her eyes still blazing. The opposing group, now more cautious, slowly backed away and then dispersed, leaving the trio alone. Astrid turned to Eric and Edda, her expression softening. You guys okay? Hearing Astrid's question, Eric nodded, relieved that everything had ended up all right. Yeah, thanks to you, he said, his voice tinged with gratitude and respect. Edda, recovering from the shock, threw her arms around Astrid. You were amazing, Astrid. The vampire girl laughed boisterously, but her words were humble. It wasn't that amazing. Eric could have done the same if he had been free to transform. Having dealt with the troublemakers, they continued on their way. As they walked, Eric couldn't help but feel a shift in his perception of Astrid. She was more than just the annoying sort of friend he couldn't seem to get rid of. She was someone who cared for them and would protect them. And in that moment, a seed of understanding and appreciation was planted in Eric's heart. Unfortunately, it would remain only a seed, as 4 years later, he was tossed into the world of soul, and every memory that involved Edda was tainted by her betrayal, causing memories of Astrid to slowly fade into the background. Only now, back in the present, did he not only remember her again, but also finally understand the feelings Astrid had for him back then. As he looked at the gullified version of the girl he once knew, he couldn't help but sigh as a bit of anger at himself welded up inside. He mumbled, I'm sorry for not thinking of you all this time, Astrid. Hell, if I hadn't encountered you today, I might never have thought of you again until it was too late. But you were never to blame for Edda's betrayal, and it was wrong of me to forget about you for so long. I'm glad coincidence has given me a chance to make things right. I don't know how you ended up in this situation, but I'll get you out of it. His eyes shone with conviction at those words. He shortly spoke with Alora to discuss the best plan of action. They considered running ahead and planting some sigils on the road for a proper ambush, but there were simply too many uncertainties in that plan. After all, they would have to move quite far ahead to have the time to set those sigils up, and they had no idea if there would be any splits in the road before then. So instead, it would be a no-nonsense frontal assault. It's not like it was all that risky. Even Eric alone could fight a regular second-rank ghoul and vampire together, let alone when he had Emily to back him up. As for the 50 rank 1 ghouls, they would barely be an obstacle. He would have to be careful with them, as they could technically pierce his armor, but they would pose little to no real threat. Before getting started, though, he felt like he was missing something. When he realized what it was, he chuckled inwardly. Aren't you going to call me a bleeding heart? He asked Alora. Surprisingly, instead of an amused giggle, he received a stream of serious yet warm feelings from his partner. Of course not. Emma and Emily were strangers, and you really are a foolish, bleeding heart for helping them. But this Astrid is different. Let's do whatever we can to help her, and I hope it helps bring you a little peace regarding your past. Eric grinned warmly. Oh, if only the Obsidian Enclave could see you now. He received the mental equivalent of rolled eyes in return. Shut up and just get going already. Eric laughed a little before doing precisely that. He turned towards Emma and Emily, who were looking at him curiously, wondering why this particular ghoul patrol was so special. However, they knew it wasn't the time to ask, so they just waited to see what Eric wanted from them. First, he spoke to the younger sister. You know what to do, right, Emma? She looked sad that she still couldn't help, but understood why and didn't make a fuss. Yes, sir. Don't worry about me. Last time, we were in the middle of a town, but here, in a forest, my thorn dome will be all the more powerful. Plus, we're high up, so they might not even realize I'm here. He smiled at her and nodded. Good girl. Don't worry. We'll get you to second rank as soon as possible. Seeing Emma smile brightly and nod with anticipation, he turned to Emily. Can you take care of the vampire woman? I know a frontal battle isn't exactly your forte, but you only need to keep her busy while I deal with the ghouls. I'm sure Alora's gift will come in handy for that. A frontal battle against a second-rank runebound was not easy for Emily, as her strength lay more in control, harassment, and range, and getting close to the woman in an attempt to enslave her was mostly just a quick way to die. Emily looked slightly reluctant about using Alora's gift, but that was mainly because of who it came from. So she nodded with a bloodthirsty smile as she released her corrupted desires. Yet, there was no corrupted red flickering in her eyes this time. It appeared their session from last night really had helped her gain some more control. Sure, boss. But what's the goal here? Just so I don't screw anything up by accident. Eric's face became grave upon hearing her question. I want to get that second-rank ghoul. Alive. Understood. Seeing his expression, Emily had to gulp a little before she nodded. Clearly, this was important to him, and she wasn't yet ready to find out exactly how forgiving Eric was towards her. She pulled the reins on her bloodthirsty instincts before asking a second question. Got it, boss. But, how we get down there? It's a 10-meter drop at least, and I'm no runbound. Losing his grave expression, Eric grinned. You leave that to me. The darker sister looked a little apprehensive at his grin, but simply nodded her assent as she had decided to put her trust in him. Seeing the sisters were both ready, and considering he was already in werewolf form, Eric wasted no time. He glanced at the ghoul patrol below, which was moving slowly along the broad forest road, and hadn't made much distance since they arrived. He conjured his hammer from the armor's storage, held it in his right hand, tensed his leg muscles, and jumped high into the air with a loud, reverberating howl. But not before snatching Emily by the waist and taking her with him. Emily, unsurprisingly, screamed, "You asshole!" in surprise and fear as the hard ground below suddenly came up to greet her, her bloodthirsty expression all but lost. Eric felt the world around him slow down as adrenaline pumped through his body, and an excited grin appeared on his face. It was time to fight, and Eric looked forward to it. As he fell and the ghoul patrol below them slowly jumped into action, lightning began to gather on the head of his hammer, a clear sign of his second lightning spell, concussive blast. When he was only 2 meters above the panicking patrol, he suddenly used his enormous strength to toss Emily up and to the left in the direction of the vampire. His upward and lateral throw essentially counteracted much of the downward velocity from gravity, and Emily landed relatively safely, if a little ungracefully, right on her ass and on top of the vampire's ghoul-carried platform. Careful, damn it, she yelled. Meanwhile, Eric took his hammer in both hands, aimed the head at the ground, and plunged the last meter downwards. He landed right in the middle of the ghoul pack as his hammer hit the ground, causing the concussive blast to release its force in every direction. A loud explosion, accompanied by the fizzling and crackling of lightning, echoed through the otherwise quiet forest. More than half of the patrol's ghouls blasted out in every direction, as many of them received heavy wounds or even died before being able to get a swipe in. Even some nearby pine trees were felled. Between jumping down and landing, at most 2 seconds passed, and considering the patrol leader's unprepared and seated state, she was still in the process of getting up from her chair when Emily landed on her platform, and Eric released his concussive blast. What the F? Fuck! She began to yell, but was interrupted by her platform sinking to the ground, as some of the ghouls carrying it were blasted away by Eric, while the remaining failed to keep it in the air, considering a human just crashed down on it. Emily was already on her ass, so she went mostly unaffected, but the vampire woman immediately lost her footing and sank back down into her chair. Seeing an opening, Emily wasted no time conjuring 2 pitch-black arrows from her seated position and hurling them towards the vampire. Still confused, but realizing the danger, the vampire reacted quickly and yelped as she crossed her arms in front of her face. Dark brown runes appeared on her skin, and a tough shell of small rocks began to form all over her body, blocking the arrows. Emily immediately cursed under her breath. It just had to be a defensive type, she mumbled hatefully. The vampire woman's eyes burnt with fury as she looked at the black patches slowly corroding her earthen armor. She quickly dismissed it before the corrosive darkness reached her skin. She wasn't sure what affinity this woman used, but it was clearly dangerous. She would have to focus on avoiding it, as dismissing and restoring her armor every time she got hit would drain her energy way too quickly. Both Emily and the vampire were now on their feet and staring at each other. Despite her bloodthirst calling out for it, Emily didn't make another move. After all, Eric had asked her to delay this woman, not defeat her. The vampire leader growled, "Who are you? How dare you attack a Dominion patrol? I don't know where you came from, human, or how you avoided detection for so long, but you should have remained hidden." Only then did she finally notice Eric, who was busy slaughtering ghouls just behind Emily. And a werewolf? When did those beasts from the Enclave stop killing humans on sight? Emily kept pulling on the reins of her instincts as she responded, so she could delay as long as possible. "Who says we're with the Enclave?" Her lips were curled into a bloodthirsty smile, as if she couldn't wait to attack again, which was true. The vampire scoffed, "I don't care who you're with. You made a mistake attacking us." She grinned maliciously. "Let's see how that mud over there deals with my second-rank ghoul." She was right to be confident. Second-rank ghouls remain essentially mindless, but they retain much more of their original self's motor skills than first-rank ghouls. She knew this ghoul was one of their best fighters, even though no one knew who she had been before becoming a ghoul. Plus, since a ghoul essentially traded their critical thinking for power, they were always at the top of their game, unlike regular vampires, who were only at their most powerful when they had a belly full of blood. Lastly, second-rank ghouls are unique in how they are controlled compared to first-rank ghouls. All this makes second-rank ghouls the strongest frontline soldier available to the Dominion. The only problem was that they still couldn't use their affinities. Yet, despite her confidence in Ghoul Astrid's abilities, she knew wasting time would be a mistake. After all, in a group fight with two second-ranked on each side, the winner would be decided by the one who could turn the battle into a 2-versus-1 the fastest. So she activated her second rune, causing lances made from rock to appear on her hands, and charged at Emily, who cursed under her breath, but also felt relieved at being able to let loose the reins of her bloodthirst. As a runebound, the vampire's physical abilities were naturally far beyond Emily's. Hence, she had to make sure to stay out of melee range. She quickly made 5 pitch-black balls float around her and began to harass her opponent with them to slow her down while Emily moved back, essentially beginning to kite her. These were the moments when she really wished her second spell was some kind of defensive or movement spell rather than enslavement. Luckily, as a reward for being a good girl last night, as Alora had put it, the fairy had taught her how to create a simple augmentation sigil. This sigil was the primary method used on Soul by lower-ranked arcanists to increase the power of their body. It wouldn't make her body even nearly as powerful as a runebound, but it might just make the difference between life and death. She poured her energy into the sigil. A symbol quickly flashed on the back of her hand, and right away, great power filled her body to the brim. She grinned widely. Time to annoy this woman to death, she thought. Meanwhile, Eric's impact had attracted every ghoul in the patrol towards him, leaving Emily free to move about. He had stowed away his hammer and turned into a whirlwind of lightning and ice as his claws ripped apart everything that came close. While he did so, Alora kept an eye on Emily for him while he was locked in a staring contest with the ghoulified Astrid. In her eyes, all he saw was insanity and obedience to whatever sigil the Dominion had used to keep their ghouls under control. Luckily, according to what he learned from his parents, ghouls could return to normal as long as they actually got their fangs on some blood. Not to mention that he had both Emma's light affinity and Emily's cedar magic to smooth over any kinks. That said, he couldn't help worrying as he looked at the thing his childhood friend had turned into. Her behavior was a little strange, though. Why do you think she's just standing there and looking at me? You think she's not entirely mindless after all? He asked Alora while continuing to slaughter ghouls. Alora was quiet for a moment before speaking up. I doubt it. Her behavior suggests she's literally observing you, which suggests critical thinking. Instead, I suspect she's under the direct control of someone. As he ripped another ghoul's head off, Eric frowned. Direct control? You mean someone else is looking at me right now? He received a mental nod, right? There are many types of beast control sigils, some of which allow for a complete takeover. I doubt every one of these ghouls is under direct control, but it's not surprising if they use this method for second-rank ghouls. They could simply use a weaker first rank for the task and get a second-rank ghoul that can actually think for itself. Kind of anyway. While Eora talked, Eric breathed deeply, opened his mouth, and touched his first ice spell. A blue magic circle appeared before his mouth, and he released a breath of icy shrapnel, instantly annihilating another 5 ghouls. So why is she, or whoever's controlling her, not attacking then? He asked. Alora seemed to think for a moment. Good question. I'm not entirely sure. It's possible whoever is controlling her is trying to find a weakness or hoping the first-rank ghouls will tire you out. However, it still seems like attacking would be a better strategy. She sent him a mental shrug. Anyway, does it matter? They won't find a weakness to exploit, and with me here, physical stamina is the least of your concerns. Eric couldn't find any fault in her words, so he nodded and went back to killing ghouls while keeping an eye on Astrid. Meanwhile, on the other side of Finnmark, the county where the Dominion ruled, in the city of Alta, a man was sitting on a large, comfortable leather chair while sipping a red, viscous fluid from a whiskey glass. The room was located in an underground bunker, left over from World War II, and had clearly been initially built with utilitarian comforts in mind. However, since then, it has been refurnished and modified to become the well-secured yet very comfortable living quarters of Sigurd Blackthorn, the Dominion's current leader and its only third-rank fighter. Lighting was sparse yet warm, which, as a vampire, suited Sigurd just fine. Various paintings and other art were spread around the room, which, combined with the luxurious furniture, warm light, rugs, and wood-covered walls, created an atmosphere of opulence and comfort despite being in a utilitarian World War II bunker. Sigurd himself was a tall man with typical red eyes, chestnut brown hair, and a sinister face, with eyes full of malice. He released a sigh of contentment as he sipped on a glass of blood in his left hand and put his right hand on the head of an unfortunate young woman between his legs. That's it, girl. Please me, and perhaps I'll go a little easier on your mother the next time I call on her. Panic and tears were evident in the girl's eyes, but she didn't stop. She didn't dare to. Suddenly, a rapid knocking sounded on his door. Anger and annoyance flashed through Sigurd's eyes as he grabbed the woman's hair tight and pushed her further down while responding to the knocking in a calm voice that belied the anger in his eyes. There is only one man who would dare to disturb him now. What is it, Lars? I know you must have a good reason to disturb me during my rest. A rushman's voice sounded from the other side of the door. Deepest apologies, Lord Sigurd, but you asked me to inform you the moment anyone found news about the girl. All the irritation was immediately wiped from Sigurd's face as a wide grin appeared on his face. Oh, did you find her? Yes, sir, but the situation requires your urgent attention. She somehow ended up as a ghoul soldier in one of our eastern garrisons near the town of Kirkens. The problem is that we found her because the Beastbinder sigil warned us of combat, and the sigil master who took control of her noticed her identity. In other words, she is currently engaged in combat, and her survival is in question. Alora was quiet for a moment before speaking up. I doubt it. Her behavior suggests she's literally observing you, which suggests critical thinking. Instead, I suspect she's under the direct control of someone. As he ripped another ghoul's head off, Eric frowned. Direct control? You mean someone else is looking at me right now? He received a mental nod. Right. There are many types of beast control sigils, some of which allow for a complete takeover. I doubt every one of these ghouls is under direct control, but it's not surprising if they use this method for second-rank ghouls. They could simply use a weaker first rank for the task and get a second-rank ghoul that can actually think for itself. Kind of anyway. While Eora talked, Eric breathed deeply, opened his mouth, and touched his first ice spell. A blue magic circle appeared before his mouth, and he released a breath of icy shrapnel, instantly annihilating another 5 ghouls. So why is she, or whoever's controlling her, not attacking then? He asked. Alora seemed to think for a moment. Good question. I'm not entirely sure. It's possible whoever is controlling her is trying to find a weakness or hoping the first-rank ghouls will tire you out. However, it still seems like attacking would be a better strategy. She sent him a mental shrug. Anyway, does it matter? They won't find a weakness to exploit, and with me here, physical stamina is the least of your concerns. Eric couldn't find any fault in her words, so he nodded and went back to killing ghouls while keeping an eye on Astrid. Meanwhile, on the other side of Finnmark, the county where the Dominion ruled, in the city of Alta, a man was sitting on a large, comfortable leather chair while sipping a red, viscous fluid from a whiskey glass. The room was located in an underground bunker, left over from World War II, and had clearly been initially built with utilitarian comforts in mind. However, since then, it has been refurnished and modified to become the well-secured yet very comfortable living quarters of Sigurd Blackthorn, the Dominion's current leader and its only third-rank fighter. Lighting was sparse yet warm, which, as a vampire, suited Sigurd just fine. Various paintings and other art were spread around the room, which, combined with the luxurious furniture, warm light, rugs, and wood-covered walls, created an atmosphere of opulence and comfort despite being in a utilitarian World War II bunker. Sigurd himself was a tall man with typical red eyes, chestnut brown hair, and a sinister face, with eyes full of malice. He released a sigh of contentment as he sipped on a glass of blood in his left hand and put his right hand on the head of an unfortunate young woman between his legs. "That's it, girl. Please me. And perhaps I'll go a little easier on your mother the next time I call on her." Panic and tears were evident in the girl's eyes, but she didn't stop. She didn't dare to. Suddenly, a rapid knocking sounded on his door. Anger and annoyance flashed through Sigurd's eyes as he grabbed the woman's hair tight and pushed her further down while responding to the knocking in a calm voice that belied the anger in his eyes. There was only one man who would dare to disturb him now. "What is it, Lars? I know you must have a good reason to disturb me during my rest." A rush man's voice sounded from the other side of the door. "Deepest apologies, Lord Sigurd, but you asked me to inform you the moment anyone found news about the girl." All the irritation was immediately wiped from Sigurd's face as a wide grin appeared on his face. "Oh, did you find her?" "Yes, sir, but the situation requires your urgent attention. She somehow ended up as a ghoul soldier in one of our eastern garrisons near the town of Kirkens. The problem is that we found her because the Beastbinder sigil warned us of combat, and the sigil master who took control of her noticed her identity. In other words, she is currently engaged in combat, and her survival is in question." Sigurd's grin quickly turned into a frown as he realized the severity of the situation. If the girl died, he would have to find some other way to convince that bitch, and he had no idea where to even start with that. He cursed under his breath and stood up before slapping the girl between his legs away from him. "Fuck off, bitch. We'll continue this another time." The girl yelped, stumbled back, and fell against the table, where she quickly curled up to protect herself. Sigurd just ignored her. He adjusted his elegant and dignified clothing so that he was once again fully covered up and rushed out the door, nearly bowling over his personal assistant, Lars, who brought him the news. "Tell me everything you know," Sigurd barked as he continued to move through the bunker's narrow hallways. Lars, who only barely kept up with his lord, quickly explained what he knew while they moved to the base's command center. The command center was where the sigil masters controlled the second-rank ghouls and even the occasional second-rank beast through the Beastbinder sigils. The way this worked was that the Beastbinder sigil on every second-rank ghoul would send a signal back to this base when they were about to get into a fight, thereby prompting one of the sigil masters on duty to take control of the ghoul and direct them as if they controlled a drone. It was a truly ingenious setup that not only proved Sigurd's intellect and callousness, but also his extensive knowledge in the art of sigil crafting. Had Alora known all this, she would have likely commended Sigurd on both his ruthlessness and his talent with sigils. Now more aware of the situation, thanks to Lars, Sigurd stormed into the command center. Inside were tens of first-rank male and female vampires sitting in front of screen-like sigils that projected the ghoul's vision. These screens connected with a second sigil imprinted on the controller's hand, which they used to direct the ghouls. "Which of you has connected Astrid?" he yelled. One of the women in the room stuck up her hand but didn't take her eyes off the screen, which clearly showed Eric as he slaughtered ghoul after ghoul. "Me, Lord Sigurd. I've been holding off on doing anything with her before you got here, sir. But this unknown werewolf is tearing through the rank 1 ghouls like they're warm packets of butter. Soon, I'll have to act or let her die." "You did well, Carrie," he said hurriedly. Despite his callous personality, he knew how to keep a small group of people loyal by treating them with respect, giving them plenty of benefits, and praising where praise is due. Then, under the astonished gazes of everyone in the room, he used his sharp nails and considerable power as a third-rank rune-bound vampire to tear out the piece of wall the sigil was etched on. Since the sigil drew power from the surroundings and from the sigil master it was connected to, in this case, Kira, it could function just fine this way. Not waiting to explain his actions, he just told the woman controlling Astrid to follow him and quickly walked out of the room with the piece of wall under his arm and an expression of sinister anticipation on his face. Both Carrie and Lars quickly followed after him. Despite their astonishment at Sigurd simply ripping out a piece of wall, they did realize where they were going. It wasn't hard to guess, considering this related to Astrid. Sigurd and his companions soon reached the maximum security area of the bunker, their steps echoing down a long hallway that ended at a lone door. With an expression filled with triumphant glee, Sigurd opened the door, revealing a room dominated by a large glass box in the center, its surface etched with various colored sigils. Inside the box sat a woman, Liv Frost. Her legs were crossed, and her strawberry blonde hair framed a face marked by the red eyes that characterized all vampires. Despite her appearance, it was clear she was not in her prime. Her skin and hair were graying, sagging, and wrinkling. The ghoulification process was taking its toll. This woman was the original founder of the Dominion, making her a third-rank vampire, just like Sigurd. Yet, despite their supposedly equal rank, Liv was far more powerful than Sigurd, mainly because of her affinity, which was especially deadly for vampires. Sigurd had managed to dethrone her only a few months ago, upon attaining the third rank himself, by tricking her and exploiting the only advantage he had, his profound knowledge of sigils. First, he challenged her to a duel for the Dominion's leadership, which she accepted without hesitation. With her limited understanding of sigils, Liv underestimated their power and overestimated her own, assuming Sigurd's ambition had clouded his judgment. She just figured he needed to be taught a quick lesson before falling in line. Unfortunately, Sigurd never intended to fight her. Instead, he cunningly lured her into her current prison by disguising the entrance to this glass box as the doorway to their dual location. Now, the very sigils she had underestimated were the only things keeping her confined. Sigurd knew that if he ever dared to enter the prison, he would not survive, regardless of Liv's weakened state. As Sigurd stepped into the room, Liv's eyes snapped open, fixing him with a gaze filled with intense hatred and resentment. Despite her deteriorating condition and the erosion of her reason and critical thinking due to the ghoulification, her calm demeanor and unwavering gaze spoke volumes of her immense willpower and resilience. "What do you want, Sigurd?" Liv spat, her voice dripping with venom. Sigurd grinned maliciously. "Why, dear Liv, I come bearing good news. My people found Astrid." A glint of despair flashed across the woman's eyes, but she quickly clamped down on those feelings and regained her calm. "You're lying," she spat with disdain. As it turned out, this woman was not only the Dominion's founder, but also Astrid's mother. Chuckling, Sigurd presented the piece of wall with a screen sigil on it. "Come now, Liv. Do you think I would come here without proof?" At the moment, the screen only showed Eric and a rapidly thinning horde of rank 1 ghouls. There were only about 10 left, and a confrontation between Astrid and Eric was mere seconds away. Yet, since the scene was shown from Astrid's eyes, her face was naturally not visible, so Liv simply scoffed. "All I see is some random shapeshifter slaughtering your precious ghouls. I should thank him for putting them out of their misery." Sigurd ignored her words and turned to Carrie, the woman controlling Astrid. "Carrie, if you would." The woman nodded without much expression. She didn't care about Astrid or Liv, which is precisely how Sigurd liked his people. Carrie made some movements with the hand that held the control sigil, and soon, the view of the screen shifted to looking down at the ground. After Eric's lightning crash, much of the snow on the ground melted from the generated heat, so there were many puddles of water spread around. One of these puddles now showed a clear reflection of Astrid's gullified face, which Liv immediately recognized as her daughter. Before her thoughts caught up, Liv stood up, yelling, "Astrid, what did you do to her?" Sigurd smiled victoriously and shrugged. "Nothing yet. Until just now, I had no idea where your precious daughter was, and I still don't know how she ended up in her current situation exactly. But frankly, I don't care." He turned his attention to the screen and noticed Eric was done slaughtering the first-rank ghouls and now looked at Astrid with confusion before approaching her. Sigurd whistled. "You're lucky this werewolf is a cautious one," completely misinterpreting why Eric didn't just go for the kill straight away. He turned back to Liv, cruelty burning in his eyes. "You know what I want from you, Liv, and you better decide quickly whether you're going to give it to me, because I'm not ordering Carrie here to fight back before you do." Despair filled Liv's face as she looked at the werewolf she presumed was about to kill her dear daughter. Yet, what Sigurd was asking of her was a lot. "Why, you still might be lying. This could be a fabrication created from your damned sigils." Sigurd sighed and shrugged. "Actually, that would be very hard to do, if not impossible. But I don't suppose you believe that. Regardless, do you want to take the risk?" Liv looked back at the screen and noticed the werewolf's claw quickly approaching her daughter's face. Tears streamed from her eyes, conflict clear in her eyes, but in the end, she finally gave in. Fine, I'll give you what you want. Just don't let her die." Knowing what Sigurd would want her to do now, Carrie quickly made a hand movement and, at the last second, made Astrid avoid the claw approaching her face. Sigurd grinned. "Good choice. Let's get started then, shall we?" Back at the battle site, Eric frowned as Astrid dodged his claw at the last moment. He naturally wasn't going to hurt her. He just needed to make prolonged physical contact so that Alora could wipe out the sigil controlling her. Since the girl was just standing there, even after he finished the rank 1 ghouls, he figured something was going on with her controller and hoped to make use of it. Unfortunately, his actions had unknowingly harmed the girl's mother in some way, which would surely come back to bite him in the future. For now, though, he had no idea about any of this. He refocused on Astrid and thought, "I suppose whoever is behind her controls has finally woken up. I guess I'll have a fight on my hands after all." Astrid now stood in a battle-ready stance, with her claws out, ready to receive him. Eric naturally obliged, and they quickly began trading blows. Behind them, Emily and the unknown vampire leader also continued their fight. Or perhaps fight was a strong word. In gaming terms, it resembled a duel between a tank and a ranged character. However, in this case, the tank moved faster than her opponent, putting serious physical and mental pressure on Emily. She constantly had to devise new ideas for using her dark orbs to slow the vampire down while she attempted to wear down her opponent's energy and armor. The only upside for Emily was that she actually had some experience fighting against Runebound from back in London, while this vampire had never actually encountered a second-rank Arcanist since all humans in this region were either dead or enslaved in blood farms. Eventually, she felt the need to say something, as things were becoming more and more dangerous for her. "Hey, boss," she yelled while barely dodging the vampire's rock drill arms once again. "Can you help me out already? I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up." As he kicked Astrid in the stomach to provide some room, he yelled back, "Just bring her to me. I'll make sure she leaves you alone." Meanwhile, he spoke to Alora inside his mind. "We need to create some sigils for mental communication later. We can't just be yelling our plans across the battlefield. Emily only speaks English, and we can't exactly assume our enemy doesn't, especially not when the Dominion leadership is listening." He received a mental nod in return. "You're right, but let's finish this first." Emily didn't question his orders, nor if he was actually able to hold both Astrid and the vampire together. She needed to do what he said, or she'd soon be dead. Naturally, the vampire heard everything they said, but she could do nothing about it. Emily tempted fate one last time by slipping past her opponent and sprinting towards Eric while her orbs of darkness floated behind her to slow down the vampire. The woman cursed her lack of range skills as she attempted to catch Emily before reaching her fighting partner. "Come back here, you human stain. Learn your place and become a blood bag like a good girl." But in the end, Emily's tactics in using her dark orbs proved superior when Emily finally stood next to Eric, panting heavily, but alive and unharmed. The vampire closed in and tried to continue attacking Emily, but Eric was a whirl of claws and lightning, forcing the vampire and Astrid to engage with him or suffer the consequences. He continued using his claws rather than his hammer, as he needed the speed his claws provided to keep both his opponents engaged. His body surged with lightning, increasing his agility, speed, and reflexes while it was covered in a thin layer of ice. He didn't use any Arcanist abilities for two reasons. He didn't want to give the person controlling Astrid any more clues to his dual nature, and those spells were also a little too destructive when his goal was to keep Astrid alive. He could only hope the other side had not yet caught on to his peculiarity, as he didn't need another third-rank character's attention when he already had Katia after him. Using the opportunity, Emily disengaged from the melee combat and created some distance. Finally in her element and able to let loose, corrupted red flickered through her eyes, and a bloodthirsty smile appeared on her face as she focused her gaze on the vampire patrol leader. "Time for payback, bitch," she mumbled as all 5 dark orbs floated around her again. For the next few minutes, lightning crackled, ice sparkled, darkness consumed, and stone endured as this 4-person battlefield raged on, disturbing the ordinarily peaceful taiga. Unfortunately, despite his generally higher battle power, Eric had one disadvantage. He wanted to keep Astrid alive while his opponents constantly went for the kill. Taking care of the patrol leader turned out to be pretty straightforward, however, especially with Emily's help. It wasn't long before the patrol leader had no more energy to keep her rock armor up, as she had to constantly dispel and recreate it when it came into contact with Emily's darkness. When he noticed this, Eric sent Astrid stumbling backwards with a right hook, careful to avoid cutting her with his claws, before turning around, burying his hand in the exhausted vampire's chest and ripping out her heart. Seeing that woman finally go down, Emily released a sigh of relief and sank to the ground as she used the newly gained control over herself to stamp down on her instincts and corruption. She was exhausted, and her magic was far too destructive to help against the ghouls since Eric wanted her alive for some reason. So, she saw no point in continuing and preferred to rest and ensure her mind stayed on the sane side of the mental scale. Finally wholly free to focus on Astrid, Eric had to pant as he observed her for a moment. He was actually bleeding from various wounds, as he had been unable to completely avoid Astrid's claws, which were able to just barely cut through his armor. Luckily, his armor could repair itself if he provided some raw materials through the engraved runes, even though it would take at least a few days. Alora could heal him, but for now, she decided to save their shared energy storage just in case something happened. After that, it took mere moments before the already exhausted and wounded Astrid was taken in a chokehold by Eric, completely immobilizing her. At the same time, Alora quickly went to work on erasing the sigil controlling the girl. Meanwhile, in the bunker under Alta, Liv kneeled inside the glass prison with an exposed back while Sigurd stood behind her as he drew a sigil. Liv's eyes were firmly cast on Kira and the screen she was standing next to. She had demanded the screen remain in sight so that she could be sure they wouldn't pull any tricks. But when Liv saw what happened on the screen, quickly followed by the screen going black, signifying a loss of connection, she went berserk. She rushed to her feet, tossing Sigurd on his ass, and screamed in despair. "No, Astrid!" Immediately, bright orange runes appeared on her skin, and the prison's insides began to heat up. Lost in her rage, she turned around, intending to kill Sigurd, but, unfortunately, the man knew when to cut his losses. He had used Liv's brief moment of despair to relocate himself outside the prison and close the door. Rage filled the man's face as he turned to Kira. "What the hell happened? You and that incompetent patrol leader were facing him together, yet you couldn't take him down?" Useless. Kira had already sunk to her knees and was shaking in terror. I'm sorry, my lord. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened with that werewolf, but he wasn't normal. His armor was ridiculously tough, his speed was off the charts, and his stamina seemed inexhaustible. But Sigurd wouldn't be placated. Excuses? Pay for your sins, he growled in fury before ripping off the mere rank 1 vampire's head in one swift motion. Meanwhile, Liv continued to rage behind him in an emotional cocktail of rage and despair. I'll kill you, Sigurd Blackthorn. One day I will kill you. She screamed as tears flowed down her face, and her body continued to shine brighter and brighter, as if she was about to blow up. Still furious, but having regained his calm, he glanced at Liv with annoyance before quickly making his way out. He didn't doubt the prison would hold, but that light pricked even his third-rank rune-bound skin, and he didn't care for it. Once outside, Lars silently walked behind his lord until he couldn't stop speaking up anymore. He was Sigurd's most trusted man and doubted he would be killed so easily. My lord, but Sigurd interrupted him, knowing what he would ask. I didn't manage to finish. It is partially complete, but exactly how much control I'll have over her when she finally becomes a complete ghoul is uncertain. It's done, Elora said. It really wasn't very hard, as it's not a complicated sigil. As the Beastbinder's sigil disappeared from Astrid's back, the blood-crazed insanity inside her had nothing to hold it back anymore, so she began screeching and flailing wildly in Eric's arms. But it was useless. They were both second rank, but with Elora boosting Eric's physical capabilities and Astrid being far more exhausted than him, there was no way she could escape from his grip. As he continued to hold her in place, he turned to the exhausted Emily, who was still panting and sitting on the ground. Come over here, Emily. It's not time to sit on your ass yet. I need you to enslave her. Emily chuckled. No rest for the wicked boss? He rolled his eyes. That's right. Now get going. You think it's comfortable holding her back like this? Sighing, Emily stood up. Fine, fine. Damn, slave driver. While walking towards Eric, she gained a complicated look on her face. Are you sure you want me to do this? I don't know who she is to you, but she seems important. Her question was a fair one. They hadn't come to an understanding that long ago, after all, and if Emily still held some resentment, using Astrid was a great way to get some leverage over Eric. Who would be faster? Eric, wielding the Covenant's power to wrest control of Astrid from Emily, or Emily, exploiting her enslavement of Astrid to compel suicide? The Covenant, after all, was only good for short-term commands. Anything long-term had to be part of the original deal, so simply ordering her now not to harm Astrid would be pointless. While Astrid continued to growl and struggle in his arms, Eric shook his head. Trust is a two-way street. You trust me, so I'll trust you. For Eric, that wasn't entirely true, however. Eric and Elora were big believers in the proverbs trust, but verify, and better safe than sorry. So they had taken some additional precautions in case a situation arose where the Covenant wasn't enough to prevent a possible betrayal by Emily. Even Emma wasn't spared from those precautions. Some people would say the duo had a small problem with trust, and they would be right. But Emily had no idea about this, of course. She couldn't help but smile a little. Being trusted by someone she had begrudgingly come to respect felt good. I'll try not to let you down then, she said as she conjured a pitch-black magic circle and touched Astrid's forehead with it. Enslaving the mind of a second rank took at least a few seconds, and Eric decided to fill the silence. You did a good job against that vampire. I honestly expected I might have to save you at some point, but you didn't even get scratched. Despite the compliment, Emily looked a little angry at herself and had to refocus to continue forming a mental connection with Astrid. Yeah, but I didn't defeat her. Eric shook his head. Don't beat yourself up over that. It was a bad matchup for you. Personally, I actually think we made a great team. Emily couldn't believe the warm feeling she felt flowing through her body because of his words. What happened to the tough girl she was supposed to be? She decided not to answer and quickly finished forming the connection before turning around to hide her slight blush. Why yell anyway? It's done, so let's get going. Eric grinned at her behavior and finally released Astrid, who had stopped growling and now just stood silent with a glassy look in her eyes. Eric inwardly apologized to his childhood friend for instantly enslaving her again just after she got free. Luckily, it wouldn't be for long. Soon, she would truly be free. Emily stood at the bottom of the cliff they had just jumped down from and looked up. So, I'm sure you and the ghoul can climb up there, but how am I supposed to do it? Eric, still in his werewolf form, released a growling chuckle. Surely this should be obvious, no? The moment he finished talking, he grabbed Emily by the waist and tossed her over his shoulder. Asshole, stop doing that, she yelped. Eric laughed as he began to climb up. But you make it so much fun. Emily grumbled a little with her arms crossed as she hung over his shoulder, forced to look downwards while they climbed higher and higher. She thanked her lucky stars she wasn't afraid of heights. Seeing Astrid still standing there, she quickly remembered to mentally command her to follow them. Looking up, Eric could already see the smiling face of Emma looking over the edge and waving at them. Clearly, she had dispelled her thorn dome when the sounds of fighting died down and wanted to check if he and Emily were all right. Eric sighed. Foolish girl, he thought. What if we had lost? When they arrived on top, Eric put Emily down, and Emma quickly began fussing over them. Are you both all right? There's so much blood down there. She inspected both of them for any injuries with a worried expression, but found nothing apart from gashes on Eric's armor. Eric and Emily just let her do her thing with indulgent smiles. Despite her smile and the clear happiness at her little sister's behavior, Emily couldn't help but roll her eyes. We're fine, little Em. You should have seen the boss fighting like a maniac down there. Now, stop fussing already. Emily never received any wounds, and Eric had already healed for the most part, as all his wounds were not much more than superficial scratches after just barely piercing through his armor and ice barrier. Meanwhile, any blood had already been cleaned by Alora, so the only thing left was the damage to his armor, which would take a few days to fix. Yet, when Emma touched the gashes in his armor, she looked up at him with a worried expression despite seeing no blood. Are you sure you're fine, sir? Eric smiled and returned to human form before caressing Emma's silky white hair. Yes, Emma, I'm fine. His expression then morphed into a frown. He took her chin in his hand and made her look into his eyes. But you wouldn't have been if we'd lost that fight. You should have stayed hidden until we actually got up here and made our presence known. Smiling brightly, Emma gave an answer that shocked both Eric and Emily. What would be the point of that? Had you both died, I would have jumped from the cliff anyway. Eric even felt Alora's soul tremble just a little bit inside of him, though that was likely just surprise. Seeing Eric and Emily lost for words while their expressions went from shock to anger to sadness, she suddenly felt a little guilty over her hasty words. Eric had already released her chin, so she looked at her feet and poked her fingers together. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I guess my thoughts got a little away from me while I sat up here and listened to you fighting. It's just the two of you are all I have. Setting aside whether I would want to continue living without you two, I don't even have any survival or fighting skills. All I can do is do a little healing or curl up in a ball to protect myself temporarily. Clearly, the bright-eyed girl still had some demons inside her. As her words sank in, Eric felt the weight of her life pressed down on his shoulders, and he sighed. He removed the upper pieces of his armor and took Emma into a hug without saying a word. What could he say? I don't want to hear you say such things. That wouldn't change her feelings, nor, in fact, the reality. Because she was right. This was a dangerous world, and Emma had no real way of protecting herself. All she could do was rely on Eric and Emily. Back on Sol and most other planets out there, healers were highly regarded and would often have powerful bodyguards. But here on Earth, it would really all depend on who you encounter, and considering what they knew of the Enclave and Dominion, neither of them was likely to care about her abilities. Emily also closed in, and it soon became a three-way hug with Emma in the middle. Idiot girl, Emily whispered. We need to get her to rank 2, or at least give her some other method of fighting. And soon, Eric said to Alora inwardly. Alora responded immediately, yeah, then sent him a mental sigh. This is what you get when you're a bleeding heart, you know. Meanwhile, Emma still looked guilty over causing them distress, but also smiled a little as she enjoyed the hug. After a few minutes, they separated and seemed to have come to a tacit agreement not to talk about what just happened. At least, not for now. Seeing the awkward mood she had created, Emma quickly tried to think of a way to change the topic and noticed the ghoul with glassy eyes, who had been standing next to them this whole time. "So who's this?" she asked. Eric chuckled at her question, knowing full well what she was trying to do. And he was going to let her. "Well, perhaps it's time I tell you girls a little more about myself. I'll do it while we walk, though. It shouldn't be long now before we reach Frostvik." They started walking, and Eric told them about growing up in Frostvik. He explained how he knew Astrid and that he really should have treated her better. He talked about his kind father, his boisterous mother, his friendly Uncle Vilger, and, of course, Edda, his childhood crush. He finished by explaining how he and Edda had just begun to explore the possibility of a real relationship when she betrayed the village and chased him through the woods. He didn't mention Sol just yet, though. Coincidentally, that was the same time that the awakening happened, which I managed to leverage into an escape. I haven't been back here since then. He finished with a shrug. The girls had different reactions. Emily narrowed her eyes. That Edda sounds like a real snake. Think she's still around somewhere. Meanwhile, Emma clung to Eric's front like a koala despite the fact that Eric continued to walk. "I would never betray you, sir." Eric smiled at both of them, first responding to Emma as he caressed her head. "I know you wouldn't, Emma." Which was, again, not entirely true. He was maybe 99% sure she wouldn't betray him. He turned to Emily. "I doubt she's still around here somewhere, as neither the Enclave nor Dominion seems very fond of humans. But I have a clue as to where she might be. We'll be heading there after we're done here." Then, to both of them, "Anyway, don't be too sad on my account. Yeah, that day was terrible, but the 7 years since then have been pretty good to me, unlike for the two of you." Eric chuckled at her question, knowing full well what she was trying to do. And he was going to let her. "Well, perhaps it's time I tell you girls a little more about myself. I'll do it while we walk, though. It shouldn't be long now before we reach Frostvik." They started walking, and Eric told them about growing up in Frostvik. He explained how he knew Astrid and that he really should have treated her better. He talked about his kind father, his boisterous mother, his friendly Uncle Vilger, and, of course, Edda, his childhood crush. He finished by explaining how he and Edda had just begun to explore the possibility of a real relationship when she betrayed the village and chased him through the woods. He didn't mention Sol just yet, though. Coincidentally, that was the same time that the awakening happened, which I managed to leverage into an escape. I haven't been back here since then. He finished with a shrug. The girls had different reactions. Emily narrowed her eyes. That Edda sounds like a real snake. Think she's still around somewhere. Meanwhile, Emma clung to Eric's front like a koala despite the fact that Eric continued to walk. "I would never betray you, sir." Eric smiled at both of them, first responding to Emma as he caressed her head. "I know you wouldn't, Emma." Which was, again, not entirely true. He was maybe 99% sure she wouldn't betray him. He turned to Emily. "I doubt she's still around here somewhere, as neither the Enclave nor Dominion seems very fond of humans, but I have a clue as to where she might be. We'll be heading there after we're done here." Then, to both of them, "Anyway, don't be too sad on my account. Yeah, that day was terrible, but the 7 years since then have been pretty good to me, unlike for the two of you." Continuing to cling to him, Emma headbutt Eric's chest while pouting. "It's not a contest, sir." She turned to the glassy-eyed Astrid walking next to them. "I'm sure it's nice to meet a friend from back then who's still alive, right?" "Well, sort of. Will she be all right? I don't know much about vampires, let alone ghouls." Eric patted her head. "Don't worry. She should be fine. In fact, you'll be able to help me save her." Emma's eyes lit up immediately as she heard she would be able to help Eric with something. "Really? I'll do anything for you, sir." Immediately, Emily rolled her eyes and mumbled, "Have a little shame, sis." Meanwhile, Eric grinned at the girl, still clinging to his body. "Oh? Anything, huh? Well, I suppose I have some things in mind. Especially when you cling to my body like that." Emma's face went red at the implication of Eric's words, but she didn't let go. "Okay." Seeing the combination of innocent lust and embarrassment on Emma's face made Eric excited, something that clearly showed on his face. In a quick movement, He grabbed Emma by the neck and pulled her up to his face, where he quickly began to suck on her lips. Emma was surprised but had long lost any resistance to Eric and quickly gave in. She clung harder to Eric's body as she became lost in their kiss, his delicious taste quickly making her forget about the world around her. Next to them, Emily stomped on the ground. "Do you have to do that right next to me?" After a few more moments, Eric broke his kiss with Emma, causing the girl to quickly lose strength in her arms. Luckily, Eric caught her, and she now sat on his powerful right arm. He turned to Emily with a smirk and used his left arm to pull her closer. Jealous, now mere centimeters from his face, Emily had a gulp as her eyes were inexplicably pulled to Eric's lips, which were just recently locked in a battle with Emma's. No, she mumbled unconvincingly as she remembered his taste. "So that means you don't want to kiss?" he teased, his mouth now millimeters away as his warm breath tickled her skin. Emily began panting as her gaze went from Eric's teasing amber eyes to his mouth. Finally, Emily didn't feel like resisting any longer. She closed whatever gap remained between them and assaulted his mouth, causing her to moan and tremble as her body was assaulted with pleasure. Eric responded by wrapping his free hand around her and pulling her against his body. By now, they had stopped moving, and under Ghoul Astrid's glassy stare, Eric continued to hug, grope and kiss both sisters, forcing them to also taste each other. This lasted a few minutes before they finally continued walking. Eric wore a satisfied grin as he smacked his lips and enjoyed the taste these two girls left behind. Aside from having been pleasurable, he could also feel some of his apprehension melt away. He didn't really think he would feel like this when the day of his return rolled around, not after 7 years. He was a different man now, powerful and assertive, yet he couldn't avoid some of the scars left behind by his past. Meanwhile, Emma and Emily suddenly looked remarkably similar, as they both had red faces and embarrassed looks while doing everything they could to avoid eye contact. A few hours later, they emerged from the taiga forest. Eric's pace slowed until he stood motionless before the edge of one of the many cliffs in the mountainous region where they found themselves. This cliff had been a witness to his life's most devastating moment, the cruel eradication of his roots. This was where he first felt the prick of Edda's betrayal, and where he woke up, only to find his life had turned upside down. He gazed at the forest's edge they had just come from, where he had once begun his flight from Edda and her hunters, his heart a battleground of emotions. As they walked through the taiga earlier, he attempted to spot his path that night, but recognized nothing. Unsurprising, perhaps, as he had other things to focus on back then rather than think about exactly where he was going. Eric's heart was a complex mix of emotions. He wasn't scared or anxious about what he might find, but it felt a little unreal. He had spent 7 years on Sol, putting the past behind him, expecting not to see Earth for a long time, if ever. Yet, here he was anyway, and while those 7 years on Sol, together with Alora, had been a bomb, the scars remained, hidden but unforgettable. The rush of despair, fury, and an acute sense of loss emerged again from the depths of his memory. As Alora materialized before him in her larger form, still dwarfed by Eric's stature, she lifted herself on her wings to meet his gaze. Her hands, delicate yet firm, cradled his face, her smile a beacon in the emotional storm. In her eyes, he found not just solace, but a reflection of the strength he had forged in their years together. As Eric looked into Alora's smiling face, those feelings weren't so hard to bear now. He wasn't alone, and, considering the bond that existed between the two of them, he likely never would be again. They kissed, and it was as a seal over the wounds of the past, a reassurance of their intertwined future. "Thank you," he murmured, a genuine smile breaking through his chaotic thoughts. Behind him, Emily looked a little uneasy. She simply wasn't sure what she felt as she looked at the display of affection between Eric and Alora, but it felt disturbingly similar to jealousy. Emma, on the other hand, just smiled happily and genuinely. After Eric and Alora separated, she turned into her smaller form. She sat down on his shoulder, ready to be a physical presence of comfort. "Come, show me where you grew up," she said. Eric grinned to slightly alleviate the mood. Haven't you seen everything in my memories already? To which the fairy giggled. Yeah, but it's not the same thing. Her green eyes took on a darker and more intense shade. I've experienced every memory, every pain, every joy in your past. But now I want to feel it with my own two hands and see it with my own two eyes. I want to walk where you walked and sleep where you slept. Eric smiled a little. He didn't see this side of Alora often, but he always knew it was there, simmering under the surface, and couldn't deny he kind of liked it. Despite her usual playful and caring attitude towards Eric, there was also an aspect of obsession with her love for him. It wasn't entirely unexpected, perhaps, considering that Eric was basically the answer to not just one but two of her greatest desires from the moment she was born. He was the partner she had always wanted to rule side by side with, who possessed the first, and so far only, body she had encountered that could be infused with various powerful bloodlines through her unique ability. In the beginning of his life on Sol, this obsession created the greatest obstacle in what eventually became their love story, as Alora cared more about grooming him to be her partner and using him as an experiment than the man himself. Naturally, Eric eventually managed to pierce through the obsession, which then began to be slowly reined in by Alora's growing love for him. But it never entirely disappeared, as part of the obsession simply changed faces. Suddenly realizing what she had just said, Alora coughed a little and had a rare, embarrassed expression on her face. Anyway, let's get going. Eric snickered and caressed her head with a finger. You know I don't mind when you get a little crazy over me, right? In fact, I might even like it. She still looked a little uncomfortable, but enjoyed his caress while answering. Yeah, but I don't like myself that way back when all my feelings for you stemmed from obsession over my own desires. I didn't treat you very well. She particularly remembered the first time she infused Eric with a bloodline. She shook her head, and I don't want to return to that. Eric smiled at her. You worry too much. It's not like your feelings for me are suddenly going to disappear, after all. Sporting a relieved smile, Alora shook her head. No, of course not. Feeling the conversation's end and seeing the anticipation in Alora's eyes, Eric finally approached the edge and, despite being unsure why, had to sigh in relief when he saw Frostvik lay spread out below them, mostly intact yet unfamiliar. The common building, the heart of the village, and more a bar than anything else stood as a reminder of communal life so distant from his current reality. The simple yet sturdy houses evoked memories of a simpler, unburdened existence. A wave of nostalgia washed over him. He was thrilled with his current life and was not interested in returning to his old one, but he had a happy youth in Frostvik until it ended. Many memories he had suppressed because of Edda started floating to the surface again. But there were also the bad memories, particularly of that night. It was from here that he witnessed both of his parents fighting for their lives. And in particular, his kind and loving father was driven into a corner on the verge of being killed. He turned to where he last saw his mother, while she valiantly led the village in its defense. Would she have approved of his choice to run away? Or would she have preferred he stand his ground together with the village? He had asked himself this question in the past, and always concluded that she would have wanted him to run, especially considering what running away led him to. Yet, doubt always managed to creep itself back in. Shaking himself free from these thoughts, and once again confirming to himself that he did the right thing, he kept inspecting the town. There were new additions that caught his eye, a robust fence for one. When he lived here, there was no need for such a thing, as it would have been hard to build anything that would actually protect against hunters and vampires, while shapeshifters' strong hearing and sense of smell were usually enough to warn of any intruders. Unless someone had poisoned the whole town with wolfsbane, of course. It was a blessing that Ethereum had severely reduced a shapeshifter's weakness to wolfsbane in the same way as it had done with a vampire's weakness to light. The second new addition he could see had some more impact. It was a graveyard, a stark memorial to the lost. His gaze lingered on the stones, each a silent guardian of a story that ended too soon. His heart began to beat faster. Could someone have survived? He mumbled. Someone who went through the trouble of burying everyone. Yet, the voice of harsh reality came from his shoulder. I don't want to stomp on your hope, but we can't assume that, Alora said. 7 years is a long time, and we don't even know if it's actually your people that are buried there. Era put a halt to his thoughts and sighed. I know. You're right. We should get down there and check the place out. While she couldn't read his thoughts, Alora did notice the swirl of emotions he was going through and put her small hand on his cheek as she smiled. There's no point to stewing in your own thoughts when you can find out the truth for yourself. Eric sighed. She was right. And when had he become so emotional anyway? He thought he'd put all this behind him during his time on Sol, but just being here made it all come rushing back. He smiled and turned to the three women behind him. Come on, let's see what's left of my old home. Emma smiled, but Emily looked complicated. She may have come to some form of agreement with Eric, but she still wasn't sure how much she actually cared about him emotionally. Meanwhile, Astrid naturally didn't react at all. They descended a path to the right and soon found themselves in front of the fence. Strangely, there didn't appear to be any opening or gate to allow people through. It was all just one long, uninterrupted wall of stone, wood, chain-link fencing, and barbed wire. Naturally, this didn't stop them, but since all his methods were a little too destructive, he asked Emily to use her corrosive darkness to create a hole instead. Emily nodded without saying anything. She noticed Eric's emotional mood and felt that her input would only make things awkward. Instead, she just conjured her 5 dark orbs, combined them all into one big, flat surface, and covered as much of the fence with it as she could. Soon, a hole appeared that was large enough for them to fit themselves through, and not long after that, they were all standing next to the first house. It looked intact. In fact, just from looking at this settlement, you wouldn't be able to tell that the inhabitants were once slaughtered. But that wasn't a big surprise. Those hunters used a combination of guns and melee weaponry, which meant no large explosions. After all, back when the hunters attacked, the destructive powers of today's Earth were still rare. Currently, he and Alora suspected Eric's mother of having already been a rank 1 back then, which meant the hunters likely had a rank 1 as well, assuming they investigated their opponent before attacking. Yet, 2 initiate rank fighters were not enough to demolish a town like Frostvik, where the houses were sturdy and had plenty of space between them. The worst he found were some bullet holes in the walls. Eric's footsteps crunched in the snow. Each step felt like a journey back in time as they passed house by house. Sometimes, Eric would stand still and let some memories of his past drown out the present. While reminiscing, he told the girls everything that came to him. It helped to talk about it out loud. That way, the memories became real and no longer locked inside his head. Emily and Emma just followed silently, not wishing to disturb Eric's moment. Sometimes, he would look at a spot and recognize it as the location of a significant memory. Like the place he first kissed Etta, one of the many would-be sweet memories, which Etta's betrayal had turned sour instead. Or where he talked about the birds and the bees with his father after the man learned about that exact kiss. Or the spot where he often trained with his mother. A bittersweet memory, as he got to spend time with his mother while doing something he didn't enjoy at the time. He also saw himself being pampered by Aunt Ingrid and Uncle Vilger. They were his actual aunt and uncle because Ingrid had been his father's sister. As he passed their home, he could almost smell the hearty stews and hear the warmth of their laughter. Ingrid, always bustling around with a smile, and Vilger, the gentle giant whose strength was matched only by his kindness. It was them who adopted Etta when she and Vilger found her as a baby, left alone in the woods. Fury rose inside him when he thought about their kindness being used against them, against their family. But he quickly shook it off. This was not the time for anger. Vilger was a werebear, but most just called him the local teddy bear, despite his absolutely fearsome strength being only second in the entire village, right after Runa, Eric's mother. Approaching the common house, the heart of their community, Eric's eyes fell upon the makeshift graveyard. The snow lay undisturbed, each grave marked by a boulder, names etched with a care that spoke of respect and mourning. His heart tightened at the sight, a tangible reminder of what was lost. He seemed to hesitate a moment, but immediately shook his head. He had already sorted through his emotions earlier. Now it was time to act. It was time to find out whose graves these were. Meanwhile, back at the battle site, on the blood-soaked road, Winding through this dense taiga forest, more than 50 corpses lay scattered about, and the air still hummed with the powers released during the recent fighting. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, emerged from the underbrush and looked around. They wore strange clothes that looked like extremely elastic bodysuits, fitted with various straps and bands while covering only the chest and upper thigh areas. Both the men and women wore essentially the same things. As they inspected the bloody scene, none had disgusted looks on their faces, as they appeared curious instead. The tallest among them was built like a bear, with wide arms and legs, and a barrel chest to match. In general, he looked ready to snap some trees in half. His hair was long, ginger, and wild, as was his beard, which had been done up with Viking braids. He looked around with a frown before speaking in a deep, commanding voice. "Bjorn, tell us again what happened here." A much shorter and skinnier man stepped forward. Physically, he was extremely underwhelming compared to the larger man. Still, there was a ferocity in his eyes that would leave many hesitant about engaging him. He enthusiastically spoke. "Ah, you should have seen it, boss." He waved a bit behind him to the opposite side of the cliff Eric jumped down from. "I was sitting in a tree somewhere over there, following that patrol, as you said, and thinking about how boring this assignment was when, bam, down came some armored werewolf, jumping from that cliff and causing an explosion or something." He explained the ensuing fight in excruciating detail while doing some shadow boxing and excessive hand movement, as if he were a participant in the battle. When he was done, a voluptuous woman with platinum blonde hair and a lustful grin spoke up. "He sounds hot. A little savagery is never a bad thing in a man." The second woman, Anne, who looked far more lithe and athletic, palmed her face. "Damn it, Nora, keep your panties on for once. We don't even know if this guy's friend or foe yet." Nora wasn't deterred and licked her lips. "That's fine. If he's an enemy, I'll just chain him up first. Actually, I might do that either way." And rolled her eyes before she narrowed them. "Anyway, I'm more interested in that disgusting human. I thought we killed them all after the purges 7 years ago. So, where did this one come from? And how is she so strong?" It remained silent for a moment, as no one had an answer. Instead, Bjorn began laughing and turned to a voluptuous woman with platinum blonde hair. "Human aside, I wish you good luck with chaining that armored maniac up. From what I've seen, only the boss might have a chance of keeping him in one place." Seeming to think of something, he turned toward the man in question. "In fact, I would pay good money to see you and that werewolf slugging it out sometime." The man he called boss released a deep, disgruntled huff. "We'll see about that. Now, let's get to the interesting part. What happened after the fight was what most interested these 5 people. Had it not been for that, they would have simply sent some first-rank weakling trying to earn his stripes and see if these people could be reasoned with." Seeing the boss wasn't in the mood, Bjorn sighed. All right. So, when it was all done, it got weird. The guy only killed the second-rank vampire, but not the ghoul. Instead, he just took it into a chokehold for a few seconds until the ghoul suddenly went crazy, as if whatever method the Dominion used to control their ghouls was removed. Next, the werewolf and the human talked, but I was too far away to hear what was said. The girl walks over to the ghoul and does something I can only describe as creepy before the ghoul suddenly goes all docile and stops resisting. Bjorn shrugged, and that was basically it. The werewolf helps the girl up the cliff, and the ghoul follows like a good pet. After that, I figured it was better to get you, boss, rather than keep following them. The boss nodded thoughtfully. "You did good, Bjorn. If they discovered you and you died, we would have known nothing now. We should be able to follow their trail from here. But first, any opinions on what happened at the end there?" The other men and women looked at each other and scratched their heads until Anne, who had ash blonde hair, spoke up. "Well, assuming that Bjorn is right and the Dominion's control was removed, then that girl must have applied some new method of doing the same. Either that, or the ghoul going crazy was a coincidence, and it was simply the girl taking over the Dominion's method. Whatever the case, we need what they have, which is why Frostfawn wanted 5 second rank on this." The boss nodded. "Right, but there's one thing that bothers me about the first possibility. Bjorn, how sure are you that the werewolf first removed the Dominion's control?" The man in question shrugged helplessly. Even if you beat me black and blue, I still wouldn't know for sure. I was too far away to hear their voices, let alone see the ghoul's eyes. All I know is that the ghoul went from skillfully trying to escape that man's chokehold to basically just flailing around like a puppet with its strings cut as its movements became erratic and uncoordinated. The third man, Olaf, who had yet to speak, snorted in disdain. You should have gotten closer then. Bjorn didn't bother himself with the man's disrespect and just shrugged, and risk ending up on the business side of that armored maniac's claws, or worse, that creepy human's pitch black magic? No, thank you. Olaf looked at Bjorn with ridicule. I thought you, Wereverine's made up for your physical shortcomings with ferocity? Now you're telling me you were scared. Bjorn was clearly a laid-back man, as he kept his calm and simply waved his hand in dismissal. Ferocity is not the same as stupidity, Olaf. Maybe I'll show you when we're back at camp. Before Olaf could retort, their leader stopped him. Enough. The reason I asked that question before you idiots began bickering is that I can't help but wonder if that human might be controlling the werewolf. Immediately, all eyes went wide as they all gnashed their teeth. It was who spoke up first. That damn human stain. Wasn't it enough they wiped out so many villages just before the awakening? Now they wish they control us, too? I'll rip her to shreds. Her voice became increasingly agitated until Nora put a hand on her shoulder. Calm down, Ann. We all have reasons to hate humans, but we need this one alive. At least until we know how she controls those ghouls. Their leader nodded. Nora is right. I hate humans just the same, but we have to think of the greater good right now. He moved away from the edge of the battlefield and stood beneath the cliff. Either way, let us move on before the trail gets cold. After those words, his body began to change. Limbs elongated, muscles expanded, fur grew, and in less than a second, the bear-like human had become an actual werbear, one of the most brutal and powerful shapeshifters in existence. His size had grown and would now likely tower over even someone like Eric. His fur-covered arms and legs were enormous, covering almost balloon-like muscles that could likely tear anything in half, so long as it was at most second rank. His clothes had grown along with the man as the elastic materials stretched to their limits, while the various straps and bands lightened the material's load. His face was now much like that of a bear as he roared into the sky and slammed his enormous clawed hand against the cliffside before beginning to climb up. Behind him, the remaining 4 people underwent a similar transformation, with Bjorn becoming a Wereverine, Olaf and Nora becoming werewolves, and becoming a werelynx. They jumped onto the cliff wall and began climbing upwards to follow their boss. When they arrived at the top, the werebear was already sniffing around and suddenly spoke up. There was a second human up here, but that's not important. What I don't understand is why I can't smell that werewolf. I thought it was because of the many ghouls and gore that I couldn't pick it up at the bottom, but even up here I only smell 2 humans. This was a habit that Alora had picked up back on Sol. She was essentially removing any trace of his passing when they traveled, or at least what could be picked up with natural senses. The others started sniffing around and inspecting the ground as well, and soon had to concur with the werebear. We can't smell him either, boss, Bjorn said. Their leader's bearish face contorted in a frown momentarily, but then he shook his head. Well, no matter. Let's follow those humans for now. He turned towards the west and frowned. I don't like this direction they're heading in, however. There's only one thing there, and I don't know what they could possibly want with that place. Standing in front of the graveyard, Eric walked forward with the intention of finding out whose graves these were. And as he looked at the name on the first stone, he immediately had his answer. Eric closed his eyes and sighed. They really are the graves of the people who died that night, he mumbled before a small smile appeared. That raises the chances someone survived. I wonder who it was, and whether they're still alive today. Alora's melodious and soft voice sounded from the side. You know there's an easy way to check, right? I doubt whoever buried them did the same to him or herself. Eric chuckled a little at that thought despite the morbidity of it. Good point. He started to move from stone to stone as he traced the names with his fingers, each one evoking a face, a story, a life. They were more than just names. They were the legacy of Frostvik, the legacy of his youth. As he read the names, Alora's presence on his shoulder was a silent anchor, her small hand resting lightly on his cheek. Her touch was a reminder of the life he had built, the love he had found, and the strength he had gained. Eventually, he came to the last few stones, and he read the first name that truly hit him. Ingrid Gunnulf, his aunt and his father's sister. The best cook he had ever known and the most hospitable person you'll ever find. He had never directly learned to cook from her, but it was his memories of her that guided his learning process for the craft back on Seoul. He stopped a little longer at her stone and closed his eyes as he recounted his memories of her once again. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes again. "I won't forget you, Ani," he mumbled. He moved on to the next stone and expected to see his Uncle Vilger, but instead he staggered when he noticed the name on this tombstone. Leifur Gunnulf, beloved father, devoted husband. He knew this was to be expected. He had prepared himself, and he had accepted it a long time ago. But actually seeing his grave was still a blow to the gut. He sank to one knee and put his hand on top of the gravestone. "Dad," he mumbled. Elora returned to her human size and hugged Eric from behind, while Emily and Emma had wide eyes and complicated expressions when they realized who was buried there. Despite his feelings, Eric had prepared himself for this. He closed his eyes and tried to recall what his father taught him of the Sami customs. Finally, he took a deep breath of crisp air and, in a deep baritone, started a low, rhythmic chant, a melody that seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves. It was a sound that transcended words, each hum and whistle weaving the essence of his father, the kindness in his eyes, the warmth of his laughter, the wisdom in his silence. Around him, the world seemed to listen. The wind carried his song over the tundra, a mournful yet comforting melody that spoke of love and loss, of a son's reverence for his father. As Eric whistled, hummed, and chanted, memories flooded through him, lessons learned, moments shared. With each note, he felt as though he was conversing with his father's spirit, sharing his journey, his struggles, and his victories. It was more than a tribute. It was a bridge between the living and the dead, a way for Eric to express what words alone could not. And as the last note lingered in the cool air, he felt a sense of peace. Finally, after 7 years, he was able to honor his father the way he deserved. Behind him, Elora had her eyes closed as a smile played on her lips. Not really for the song or for Eric's father, but because she could feel some tension being relieved from Eric's soul. Meanwhile, Emma and Emily both had tears in their eyes, although while Emma cried openly, Emily had turned around to hide herself. They didn't understand a word of what Eric just sang, but it sounded hauntingly beautiful and full of emotion. What was that?" Emma asked. Eric smiled at her. "That was a joik. It's a traditional Sami music style, usually also sung in the Sami language. My father was a Sami, and he loved his heritage, so I gave him a farewell that I know he would have loved." He started laughing joyfully. "I'm just glad I still remembered how to do it." "It was beautiful," Emma whispered. Emily had turned back around and tried her best to look nonchalant, but her voice cracked a little when she asked her own question. "Boss, I don't know what your plans are after we're done here in Norway, but do you think we can pay a visit to our old estate in London?" Eric knew immediately what she wanted to do there. It wasn't hard to guess, considering he had seen her memories and what just happened here. Perhaps normally, he would have teased Emily a little first, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it right now. So he simply nodded. "Sure, it might be a little dangerous since they'll probably be watching the place, but I think we can handle it." "Thank you," Emily whispered, once again, feeling a powerful sensation of gratitude flowing over her. Emma also realized what Emily wanted to do and smiled at her sister meaningfully. Finally, Eric closed his eyes and took a deep breath, allowing himself a last moment of grief, of honor, for those who had fallen. When he opened his eyes again, there was a new resolve in his gaze. "I've come a long way since that day," he thought, "and Elora, and I have a lot longer to go still. I wonder where I will be in another 7 years. If I have the chance, I'll visit here again by that time." He looked down at his father's grave and patted the earth. "All right, Dad. It was good to see you again. but I have things to do and places to be, particularly taking revenge, and he caressed the letters carved on the headstone, which were clearly done with a shaky hand, unlike the other headstones. Find out if Mom is still alive. He remembered every single person who once lived here, and he realized there were no more stones left, meaning there were two names missing, Runa Gunnulf and Vilger Halfjorn. He never would have imagined his mother was still alive after that night. He had seen how the entire village was swarming with hunters, even as the defenders were barely able to resist due to the wolfsbane. Sure, the awakening happened not long after, which may have wiped out many of those hunters, but that was only after Eric had already been running for several hours. Could Runa really have survived that long? And Vilger, too? He shook his head, and conviction appeared in his eyes. Well, regardless, I now have two goals. Revenge against Edda and finding my mother, he mumbled. Knowing what he was thinking about, Alora spoke up. You know there's one more stone missing, right? It seems your mother may have been holding out hope. Eric chuckled knowingly. Yeah, I'm not surprised. She likely would have refused to fully accept my death until she actually found a body to bury. He turned towards the sisters and the gullified Astrid, who had no changes of expression during any of this, with a smile. Let's go see how my childhood home is holding up. We'll take a rest there for the night while we fix Astrid up. The sisters nodded, but before Eric could get up, Alora suddenly flew down to the grave and put her hands on it. A dark green radiance appeared at her hands and soon encompassed the entire grave. Suddenly, tiny specks of soft, glowing light began to rise up and gather right beneath the headstone, where a beautiful blue flower began to appear as it bloomed. Eric smiled, as blue had always been his father's favorite color. When Alora took her hands off the grave, and the flower had fully appeared, a soft blue radiance had begun to replace the dark green one from Alora. Then, Alora took her place on Eric's shoulder again. It's a guardian flower. It's an ancient ritual for honoring the dead, and one of the few customs that is still shared between the Radiant Glade and the Obsidian Enclave. The flower will protect the grave from any disturbances. She shrugged. Well, up to a point, anyway. Even I'm only a third-rank fairy, and therefore, so is the flower. Eric smiled gratefully at her. Thank you, Alora. Proving once again her rules on only caring about family, Alora rolled her eyes. No need for all that. Your father is extended family. There's no way I would leave his grave without a little gift. After leaving the graveyard, they soon entered Eric's old house. From the outside, his house was no different from the rest. Small but sturdy and comfortable, made from wood and stone. The inside was welcoming, with various rugs and warm colors. Pictures of Eric and his family were scattered around the place, showing the love and care they had for each other. Eric felt his nostalgia bubbling up again as he walked through the house, causing him to sigh. Again, memories of various childhood events appeared in his mind, like his first verbal fight with his mother or the classic doorpost with notches for his height. But instead of focusing on those memories, he patted the house's wall. I've had enough reminiscence for one day, but thanks for keeping my memories safe. Several electrical appliances were spread throughout the house since Frostvik used to have access to electricity. Of course, none of them worked now since the electrical grid had long since collapsed on a larger scale. Luckily, the house had an emergency generator, and while it didn't have any fuel left, Alora had a solution for that. She had little to no knowledge of electricity or modern devices. Still, by studying the phone they had been given by Kadia and the electrical motor on the boat they stole, Alora was able to decipher the sigil they used to convert Ethereum to electricity. Back on the boat, Eric had wondered where such a sigil had come from, considering he didn't know anything of electricity existing back on Sol or any other planet. He had decided to ask Alora about it. Where do you think this sigil came from? It looks like a modified version of a basic and well-known sigil that simply creates lightning attributed Ethereum, she explained. It's a little crude and unrefined, but whoever created it did a good job in reducing the power output and making it compatible with your modern technology. Soon, she had created her own, more refined version of the sigil and had applied it to both the boat and the phone. Now, she planned on doing the same to the house's generator. She was at the back of the house with Emily, who was brought along to continue her lessons in sigil crafting. Emily looked visibly excited, not about learning the sigil, per se, but about getting access to modern appliances again. After all, their house in London had not had electricity for a long time. Currently, Emily had a long, thin, chisel-like tool in hand and was etching the sigil onto the generator under Alora's guidance. Such a chisel was the standard tool for sigil crafting, and the one Emily was currently holding was lent to her by Alora. It took her a few tries, causing her to sigh as Alora scolded her, but soon the sigil was done, and under the excited yelling of Emma inside the house, caused the lights to go on. That wasn't all, however. After magically cleaning the emergency water tank and filling it with melted snow, they also gained running water. Unfortunately, the water heater was broken and wouldn't work even with the electricity. Fortunately, heating sigils were some of the simplest things to craft for someone like Alora. Or, in this case, Emily. Thus, after Alora used her cedar magic to make sure the pipes wouldn't burst, they ended up with warm showers. But before Emily could run back inside to enjoy the house's newly activated luxuries, she was stopped by Alora. "Not so fast," the fairy said while exercising the power of the covenant, which she had just as much power over as Eric. Forced to stop in her tracks, Emily grumbled and turned around. "What now?" Alora grinned evilly. "We still need to make some more sigils in and around the house to protect against intruders and prevent light and sound from escaping outside. And, of course, when I say we, I mean you." Emily groaned. "Why do you hate me, woman?" While putting on an expression of disbelief, Alora giggled. "Hate you? Come now, pet. I'd have to care about you first. Besides, don't you want to learn how to craft sigils?" That part, Emily couldn't deny. She just hated the dismissive way in which Alora treated her. Regardless, she sighed and relented. Fine, fine. It's not like I have much choice anyway. But can you at least stop calling me pet?" Alora grinned mischievously. "Sure, no problem. But only if you start calling me mommy." Feeling a chill down her spine again, Emily quickly shook her head. "No, thank you. I'll take the pet thing." The fairy chuckled. "As you wish, then. Now to get to work, P.E.T." Emily muttered something unkind under her breath, but began following Alora's instructions in creating the protection and concealment sigils. After they were done with everything, the house had quickly turned into a little haven of modernity, much to the delight of both Emma and Emily, who had been unable to take a proper shower in a very long time. Sure, they could keep themselves clean with some minor applications of Ethereum, but it simply wasn't the same. Even Alora had to admit that the humans of Earth had some excellent ideas regarding the comfort of living. "I like this hair dryer thing," she said while using it to dry her hair after showering. "It's much too clunky, though. I can create the same effect with some simple sigils." While a modern shower obviously didn't exist on Sol, there were plenty of sigils that created the same effect, and Alora, too, had been missing the simple comfort of such a thing. Naturally, there was no need for Alora to do any of this. Drying or cleaning her hair was as easy as snapping her fingers, but it didn't feel as pleasant or comfortable as doing it like this. Eric couldn't help but laugh when he heard of Alora's inspirations due to Earth's modern technology. After everyone had their fill of enjoying some modern comforts, Eric went to prepare a meal for everyone. While he was in the kitchen, Emma showed up. "Can I help?" she asked, with a bit of anxiety for fear that he might say no. "I'd like to be able to cook for you someday." He could only grin at her desire to serve him and was naturally more than willing to have her help, although he probably wouldn't give up on cooking altogether. He had come to enjoy it, and it was a way to honor his aunt. With Emma's help and company, the time he spent on cooking flew by, and soon they all sat together around the table. While they ate, Eric told Emma and Emily about his immediate plans. "We'll probably spend at least a few days inside this house, so feel free to get comfortable," he said. "I want to spend a little time trying to find a clue about my mother and uncle's whereabouts while I practice with the training notes that bear woman, Katia, left with me. I've only been able to study them on the boat so far, as there wasn't much room to practice. After dinner, we'll cure Astrid, and she'll likely need a few days to recover as well. Meanwhile, I want the two of you to focus on getting stronger. Emma, Alora will be helping you to advance as quickly as possible while staying safe." Elora, who was currently in his soul, answered. It's also a good time to try and find some clue as to what your mother knew about this entity that dragged us here and gave you that dream. Assuming she knew anything. Eric nodded inwardly at Elora, while the Ashcroft sisters nodded in acknowledgement of his words. Finally, when everyone was done eating, they gathered in Eric's old room. It was time to do something about Astrid. His room was nothing special and looked like what any young, introverted boy's room might look like. There was a bed, a desk with a computer, some posters, and some books. And, of course, a hidden compartment behind his bed where he kept the backup research materials in case the power went down, which wasn't a rare occurrence for a remote village like Frostvik. Emily looked at one of the music posters and then at Eric with an exasperated expression. aWolf? Really? Isn't that a little on the nose? Eric grinned innocently. I was going through a phase. What can I say? I'm just glad that was my most recent musical phase. He laughed. I'm afraid you might lose all respect for me if you learned about some of my other phases. But Emily patted him on the shoulder in a show of camaraderie. It's all right, boss. I've gone through similar things. I won't judge. Immediately, Emma began to giggle. Right, I vividly remember your Wiccan phase. Mom and Dad nearly pulled their hair out when you started to bring a rock with you everywhere and called it your familiar pebbles. Immediately, Emily lost all color in her face and quickly covered Emma's mouth while laughing sheepishly. She's just kidding. Eric laughed loudly at Emily's embarrassment. Thanks for that, Emma. I'll be sure to reward you later. While Emma smiled brightly beneath Emily's hand, and Emily herself grumbled about her little sister being a traitor, Eric pointed at Astrid. All right, enough kidding around. Emily, please tell her to lie on the bed. The black-haired girl sighed in resignation at being humiliated by her little sister before giving a mental command. The gullified Astrid quickly responded by lying on the bed and looking up with a glassy stare. Eric took some robust chains originating from Seoul out of his storage and bound her arms and legs together. Better safe than sorry, after all. He then went down on his knees next to her face and put his arm in front of it. Since his body was the toughest and his blood the strongest, it would naturally be him who would provide the blood she needed. Next, Emma took position behind Eric with a gaze that said she would give it her all, although Eric didn't really expect her to have much trouble. Meanwhile, Elora disappeared into a cloud of specks and merged with Eric to make his body as robust as possible. Eric put his hand on Astrid's cheek and looked at her with care. It'll be good to see you again, Astrid. He turned to the girl in the back. All right, Emily. Remove your control now. She looked a little skeptical, however. Wouldn't it be safer if I just order her to bite you? But Eric shook his head. No, I'd rather she wake up with a clear mind. Besides, it might be better to let instinct decide how much blood she needs. As you wish, Emily shrugged, not really bothered either way, as she knew Eric would have little trouble subduing the ghoul again, should it come to that, especially because of the chains binding her. Her eyes flickered momentarily, and immediately, Astrid lost the glassy stare while insanity flooded back. She screeched and tried to lunge forward, but was unable to move much because of the chains. However, it didn't take her long to smell delicious blood, the one substance that always occupied the entirety of a ghoul's mind, flowing through Eric's veins. And with his arm being held right in front of her face, she had little trouble reaching it. With a sickening crunching sound and a sharp intake of air by Eric due to the pain, she closed her eyes and bit down on Eric's arm hard before sucking his blood like an electric water pump. Even Eric's powerful body quickly felt the drain and couldn't keep up with Astrid's demands. Any non-second-rank runebound would have long since been drained of everything they had. Luckily, that's where Emma and Elora came in. Despite knowing what was going to happen, the sickening sounds of Eric's flesh being pierced and then his blood getting slurped up made Emma nearly vomit. Luckily, she managed to hold herself together by remembering Eric needed her help. She held out her hand, and a bright white magic circle appeared, which quickly began to bathe Eric in light and accelerated his bodily functions, including blood generation. Meanwhile, Elora used a combination of her seed or magic and her influence over Eric's body to do essentially the same thing. Between the two of them, Eric's body was just barely able to keep up with Astrid's demands. Although, that didn't make the experience any more pleasant. Eric had his eyes shut tight as he ignored the pain shooting through his body that came from having his blood constantly sucked away and replaced. During all this, Emily looked at the proceedings with a morbid fascination that slightly triggered her bloodthirst and corrupted desire for murder. But she quickly stamped down on those feelings. Yet, everyone's efforts were having a clear effect, as Astrid's gray skin was quickly regaining its pale white color, while wrinkles disappeared and her hair regained its strawberry blonde luster. Suddenly, she opened her eyes. Insanity was quickly draining away as her ghoulish needs were finally being met, and clarity was returning to her gaze. Yet, Eric noticed none of this, as his eyes were still closed. She turned her head to Eric, and a flicker of recognition seemed to pass through her eyes, but she didn't stop and kept sucking hard and fast. The sound of slurping dominated the room, as no one said a word. It took a whole 5 minutes of Astrid guzzling down blood like a swarm of mosquitoes in a steroid-induced rage before she finally looked like a normal vampire. She released Eric's arm from her mouth and, for a moment, looked around deliriously before focusing her gaze on Eric. She smiled softly and mumbled, I guess I ended up in heaven. Maybe here I'll finally have you all to myself, my love. Then, she closed her eyes and fainted. Immediately, Elora appeared next to Astrid in a cloud of light specks. A smirk hung on her lips. All to yourself, huh? I'm afraid not, but since you've already declared your love, we may be able to figure something out. Hearing Astrid basically declare her love, even if she thought this was the afterlife, gave Eric some complicated emotions. Silly girl. She'll be in for a rude awakening. He thought to himself. On the one hand, her feelings proved he was right when he determined her affection for him based on his memories, and it gave him a warm feeling at the thought of this kind and boisterous childhood friend of his harboring love for him. Yet, it also complicated things a bit, as he had first planned to take things slow with Astrid, since they had both likely changed quite a lot over the years. At least, he certainly had. Unfortunately, Astrid declared her love, and now Elora had her eyes on the poor girl. While his beloved partner left him a great deal of control in their relationship, despite their supposed equality, there were some things she would never budge on, and one of those was regarding women who declared their love for him. But that was a problem for another time. Behind him, Emma had sunk to her knees as she panted heavily. Keeping up her spell for a full 5 minutes had taken a lot out of her, but she smiled happily at the knowledge that she managed to help Eric. Sir's friend has woken up, she thought, and I helped. Finally, I've been able to pay him back, even if just a little. She looked up at his back and smiled brightly. Maybe I'll never feel like I've completely paid my debt to him. But that's okay. She began to blush a little as a warm feeling spread through her body. I'll just have to follow him forever then. Meanwhile, Emily rolled her eyes as she looked between Elora, Emma, and the newly added Astrid. Another love-struck fool to add to his collection, she thought. How does he do it, anyway? Whether or not she realized her own slight blush and lost expression when she looked at Eric was anyone's guess. Back at Eric's side, he looked at Elora and asked, with a bit of concern, how was she doing? In response, Elora conjured a dark green magic circle and let its light spread over Astrid's body. Soon, she had an answer for him. Physically, she's fine, if extremely exhausted. Her body appears to have completely reverted to that of a typical vampire. And mentally, Eric questioned. Elora shrugged in response. I'm not sure. For what I can tell, she'll retain all her memories from her time as a ghoul, which might screw with her head a little, especially depending on how they treated her during her time as a ghoul and how it felt to have that Beastbinder sigil control her. She grinned playfully at him. She's still a virgin, though, just in case you were wondering. Eric rolled his eyes at Elora, but couldn't help but feel a little relieved, which Elora naturally noticed through their connection, causing her to giggle. Hearing her knowing giggle, Eric nearly groaned but quickly suppressed it and instead asked, Can you seal her memories of being a ghoul? Elora nodded casually. Sure, but are you sure you don't want me to just erase them? Eric shook his head. No need for that. Those memories might come in handy someday. Besides, that should be up to her. Well, it makes little difference to me, Elora said before conjuring another dark green magic circle and pressing it against Astrid's head. Seconds later, a mark appeared, signifying the seal, before dissipating into her skin. Finally done for now, Eric smiled, stood up, and gave Elora a deep kiss as thanks before doing the same to Emma. Thank you, Emma. You did amazingly well. I dash. What? I'll be welcome, sir. Anything you want, she stammered while blushing furiously. Next, he stood before Emily with a teasing grin on his face. Well, I want to thank you. Emily grumbled for a moment about unfairness, but then closed her eyes and leaned forward in anticipation of a reward. Yet, instead of his lips, all she found was air. She opened her eyes and saw him walking past her with a grin. You'll have to follow me then. You come too, Emma. Meanwhile, Elora had removed the chains from Astrid's body and was now relaxing in Eric's soul again. Hearing Eric's demand, Emily was stunned for a moment before she cursed under her breath. Damn that bastard. She closed her eyes. But I'm not going to follow him, she thought with overflowing conviction. However, Emma had no such conviction and immediately got up to follow Eric with a happy smile. When she caught up to him, she asked, What about Astrid, sir? Should we leave her like that? Eric shrugged in response. It's fine. She likely won't wake up for quite a while as her body is exhausted. And even if she wakes up sooner than expected, she should recognize my room. She's never been in there, but we've had video calls. She probably won't freak out, and even if she does, I'd rather that than have her find herself chained up. Emma nodded in acceptance, but still offered her opinion. I think she would like it if she woke up with you beside her, sir. You're probably right. And perhaps I'll keep a vigil later, but for now, I'm exhausted from having my body sucked dry and refilled a couple of times after an already emotionally heavy day. He answered while smiling lightly. They reached his parents' bedroom and went inside. Since Astrid occupied his bedroom, Eric decided to sleep there instead. The bed was also bigger, so he would be able to fit together with the girls. The room was a little larger than his and had no computer or posters. Instead, it had a few hunting trophies, furs, and rugs. There was also a large wardrobe and various pictures of his parents together, some with him, some without. The bed was king-size, making it large enough to fit 3 people. Not that his parents were particularly adventurous. They were just large people. Eric had to get his size from somewhere, after all. He turned to Emma and gave her another kiss before producing some rope. We're going straight to sleep this time. Do you still want to be tied up? Perhaps it wasn't the best habit for Emma to have in this dangerous world, but it didn't matter too much. At least as long as Eric was right next to her. Besides, Emma could quickly burn through her ropes in a second, using her light affinity. A shy yet slightly perverted smile appeared on Emma's face as she nodded almost imperceptibly. Her mind was a happy jumble as she thought about lying helplessly next to Eric, even just to sleep. She quickly undressed to be in her underwear for comfort. After everything she had already done with Eric, this was minor. I'm becoming a pervert, she thought, and I don't care. While Eric tied Emma up, Emily was pacing in light, frantic circles back in Eric's old room as she tried to resist the urge to follow Eric. Damn that deliciously tasting, controlling asshole and his bitch of a partner. She came to a halt and sighed. At least I can still swear at her in my thoughts. She stood still for a moment and then walked out of the room. Whatever. It's not like he's that bad. When she entered the other bedroom, she wore an expression that said a lot about her turbulent thoughts. Damn, I can't believe I followed him. She looked at what Eric was doing to Emma and almost groaned. I shouldn't have expected any different. They're both perverts, she thought, but quickly scolded herself. Yet I can't even blame Emma, as it's partly my fault. When Eric was done and looked up to notice Emily's squirming uncomfortably in place, he grinned and stepped closer to her. Decided you wanted your reward after all? Emily glared at him, but didn't move as Eric came closer. Soon, his face was right in front of hers with an infuriating, teasing grin on his lips. He grabbed her chin, looked deep in her black pools, and kissed her deeply. Immediately, Emily couldn't help but moan a little, even as she scolded herself inwardly. It wasn't even so much about the delicious taste anymore, or Eric's tongue marking every inch of her mouth as his tongue wrestled with hers. Instead, she could feel her pleasure being enhanced by her growing affection for Eric despite her desperate attempts to ignore or deny it. After he had his fill, Eric released her with a confident grin. He turned around, removed his armor until he wore only underwear, and walked to the bed before lying down in the middle, where he pulled a happily squealing and tied up Emma against his chest. He then extended his arm to the side in a welcoming gesture as he looked at a still slightly dazed Emily. "You can sleep on the couch, or even with Astrid, if you like, but if you sleep here, I'll kiss you again. No perverted business tonight, though. It's been a long and emotional day." Emily gulped nervously. This would be the first time she would actually sleep in the same bed as him. Yet, before she could even really think about it, her feet were already moving as she gingerly laid down on the bed and immediately got pulled against Eric's body. Unlike Emma, she still wore all her clothes. While Emma's mismatched eyes beamed with happiness at her sister's decision to join them, Eric kissed them both, though, with Emma, he had to remove the gag for a second. Then he closed his eyes before drifting off to sleep, sandwiched between two beautiful sisters. At this point, Emily couldn't escape anymore, as she was firmly held in Eric's embrace. Yet, as she looked at Emma's overflowing happiness, felt Eric's strong arms around her, and smelt his calming scent, she couldn't bother to care. Soon, both Ashcroft's sisters were mired in a deep sleep. At the same time, 5 men and women appeared on top of the cliff, overlooking Frostvik, and gazed down with various gazes, some complicated, some menacing. It was nighttime now. The moon stood high in the night sky and illuminated the 5 of them with its radiance, making the scene quite beautiful as the snow glimmered on the taiga forest pine trees behind them. Naturally, these are the shapeshifters, Nora and Bjorn, Olaf, and their boss, who were following Eric and the others. Currently, they were in their human form. "Turns out they really did go to Frostvik," Bjorn said as he crouched down and looked around. "At least, their smell definitely leads here and doesn't seem to leave again, but I can't see any sign of them in town." The big man with Viking braids in his beard nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, but I can't figure out why. There's nothing here unless they're just looking for shelter, but, as you said, there's no sign of any houses being occupied. Naturally, Alora's sigils kept any kind of light and sound from escaping their current residence." Suddenly, Nora spoke up with glittering eyes as she nearly jumped up and down in excitement. "Aren't you guys ignoring the obvious possibility? What if she's back?" In response, she received a slap on the back of her head by "Stuff your lady boner, Nora. There's no way she would just run to Frostvik without coming to visit the boss. Besides, Bjorn's description didn't sound anything like her." The scolded, platinum blonde werewolf rubbed her head with an aggrieved expression. "One can hope, right?" But the boss shook his head as he continued to stare at Frostvik with a complicated expression. "No, and is right. There's no way it's her. Besides, there's no reason we wouldn't be able to smell her. This werewolf we're chasing is still covering his scent somehow. Besides, Bjorn might not have recognized her from that distance, but he could surely see the difference between a male werewolf and a female. Just as in their human forms, female werewolves had a thicker chest and more slender build." The wereverine with brown hair nodded. "It was definitely a guy, no doubt about it." Suddenly, and spoke up. As the only werelynx in the group, her night vision was by far the most advanced among them. "Can you guys see that blue glow over there?" she said, pointing towards a graveyard in the middle of town. They all moved their gazes in the direction she was pointing, but only their boss managed to find anything. "You're right. What is that?" And shook her head. "No idea, boss. We'll have to get closer to find out." The boss nodded. "Then, that is what we will do." He looked behind him. "Be careful, everyone. From here on out, we are entering enemy territory. There is no way to know if they prepared any traps nor where they are, which means a fight can start at any moment." The members of his group nodded sternly before they began their descent along the same path to the right that Eric and his group had followed. What they didn't notice was that a small sigil lit up on some rocks to the side every time a member of their group passed it. Back in the house, inside Eric's soul, Alora suddenly opened an eye as all 5 faces passed through her mind. But instead of warning Eric, she grinned and thought, interesting, before returning to sleep. The group of 5 reached Frostvik's fence and quickly found the hole in the wall that Emily created. As they climbed through the hole, Bjorn commented, "This looks to have been created by that creepy human with the pitch black magic. Honestly, I don't know what affinity that is, but I know touching that crap is bad for your health." And nodded thoughtfully as she looked at the hole's smooth edges. "If this is what it does to a fence, then yeah, I don't want it touching me." Their boss interrupted. "Stow the chatter and stay alert." Quickly shutting their mouths, they slowly began to make their way through the quiet town, illuminated by moonlight. Snow crunched under their boots. As they moved, they stayed alert and kept a close eye on their surroundings. Soon, they made it past the first few houses and arrived at the graveyard. "Smell says they've been here," their leader said. "Let's check out that blue glow." Carefully, the fresh snow muffled their footsteps as they approached the graveyard, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement or threat. The blue glow, now more visible, cast an ethereal light over the headstones, creating long, haunting shadows. Bjorn, his eyes narrowed in concentration, whispered, "This glow, it's not natural. Never seen anything like it in all my years." Unable to contain their curiosity, they moved closer to the source of the glow. As they navigated through the graveyard, they soon found what was spreading that strange blue light. "It's a flower?" Nora said in a confused voice, more as a statement than a question. "Sure looks like it," commented Anne while scratching her head. They were now all gathered around Leifer's grave as they looked at the strange blue flower, swaying slightly in the cold night air. Only their boss seemed to focus on the tombstone instead. "Leifer," he mumbled. "Did you know him, boss?" Bjorn asked. The man nodded slowly with an unreadable expression. "I did. That time feels like a lifetime ago now." Meanwhile, drawn in by the flower's mysterious aura, Olaf got on one knee and extended his hand in an attempt to pluck it, but found himself mysteriously unable to get close to it. "What the hell?" he murmured as he pressed his hand against a strange blue force field that appeared to encapsulate the grave. While the boss still looked lost in thought, the other 4 team members looked at Olaf's hand in wonder. "Is it protecting the grave?" Nora wondered, and couldn't help but be fascinated by it. "I don't know, but I sure would love to have a flower like that." Hearing that, Olaf perked up his ears. He was ever ready to score some brownie points with beautiful women. Quickly, fiery red runes appeared on his skin, and a dagger made of flames materialized in his hand. "Well then, let me get you that flower. I'd like to see it protect itself against this," he said, stabbing at the force field. But before his hand could even reach the field, a much larger hand wrapped itself around his neck and throat before yanking him into the air. Feeling his airway close off, the dagger dissipated from his hand as Olaf gurgled, sputtered, and struggled. "Are you trying to desecrate this grave, Olaf?" The threatening voice of his leader sounded next to his ear. "I don't know what this flower is when it appeared here, or if it's got anything to do with the people we're chasing. But setting aside that I once knew the person buried here, I won't let you disrespect any grave like that." Done talking, the bear of a man tossed Olaf to the side and turned towards Eric's old home. "Let's move on. The scent of those humans leads to that house over there. It's time to find out what's going on here." He began walking to Eric's old house with a complicated gaze. He definitely recognized that house, and combined with the flower on Leifer's grave, this situation suddenly got a whole lot more personal for him. What in the name of the ancient spirits is going on here, he thought. The other members of his group looked at the still sputtering Olaf with pity, but not with surprise. Olaf hadn't been with them as long, so he simply wasn't aware their boss had a deep respect for the dead. "Gotta be careful how you handle the dead around the boss, Olaf," Bjorn said, a little condescendingly, likely as payback for Olaf's earlier disrespect. Finally finding his breath, but still coughing a little, Olaf scrambled to his feet and looked at the Wereverine with resentment before doing the same with their bosses, receding back while muttering something unkind under his breath. But everyone just ignored this, as they quickly ran after their boss. They now stood before Eric's old house with various expressions. Their leader frowned. since there is a werewolf among them. He should have already smelled our presence. Yet he's not coming out, which means he's either asleep or waiting in ambush. But even if he's asleep, I doubt they all are, at least not without taking precautions. Bjorn shrugged nonchalantly. Does it matter? There are 5 of us and 2 of them, assuming that the second human is not of much use in a fight. Oh, and I suppose that ghoul, though I'm not sure how much use it would actually be to them. Their leader huffed in discontent, which means that, in the worst-case scenario, it's still 4 against 5, which doesn't exactly sound like an easy win, especially not if we're walking into an ambush. To which the Wereverine sheepishly scratched his head and chuckled. Suppose you're right about that, boss. Still angry and annoyed, Olaf barked. Well, what the hell do you want to do then? Ignoring the man's tone, their boss walked towards the house. Simple. I'm going to knock and see if they'll open the door. The fact is, we do not need to fight them. At least, assuming they're willing to make a deal and that werewolf isn't being controlled somehow by one of the humans. The others were a little surprised by their leader's somewhat lowbrow method, but couldn't deny the practicality of it. So they simply waited to see what would happen. Yet, something unexpected happened when he was about to knock on the door. A dark green light flashed, and, with a loud roar of pain, the ginger-haired man was tossed through the air, back the way he came from. In fact, the entire team was knocked up into the air under various kinds of screams. They all landed about 10 meters from a house, unwounded, and quickly scrambled to their feet in preparation for a fight, yet none seemed to come. They looked up at the house in confusion and noticed a dark green barrier of some kind now surrounding it. What the hell? A few of them mumbled simultaneously. Who the hell are these people? Their leader mumbled. Wanting to take revenge against another barrier, Olaf once again manifested a dagger made of fire and, with a curious glint, stabbed it against the barrier. Yet, nothing happened, as the barrier barely seemed to flinch under a frustrated Olaf's gaze. Back in Eric's soul, a mischievous little fairy couldn't help but giggle as she watched what happened outside through one of her many sigils. She thanked her foresight in teaching Emily the art of sigil crafting. It would have taken far too long if she had had to create all those sigils on her own. Suddenly, she waved a metaphysical finger around, and something began to change outside, and poked their boss's side and pointed a little upwards. Hey boss, look at that. Frowning, everyone looked up before their jaws suddenly fell down at the sight. Seriously, who the hell are these people? The ginger-haired leader mumbled again. The barrier now had some letters projected on it. Hello, unwelcome guests. Your options are simple. Either bash your heads against this barrier for a few hours until it breaks, or wait obediently until we're ready for you. Either way, I'll be entertained. Whatever you do, though, try to keep the noise down. It's late, and my master needs his beauty sleep. She naturally wouldn't forget her bet with Eric even now. Having never seen anything like this, all 5 team members had to take a few moments to recover from their surprise. Finally, and turned to the boss. So, what now? The man released an exasperated sigh. Clearly, these people have means and abilities that are alien to us. I think the best option is to play their game for now and just wait it out. He frowned. But I don't want to see any of you sleeping a wink, understood? Stay alert. While Olaf didn't look particularly happy with that decision, as he would have preferred to release some frustration on that barrier, the others simply nodded and went to find a spot to sit and wait. As for their leader, he went to the glowing grave of Leifer and sat down beside it with a sigh, his thoughts unknown. Some hours later, Eric began waking up but had yet to open his eyes. The first thing he felt was a pair of hands and feet clinging to him like a koala. He smirked inwardly. I guess I'm a burn through her ropes, and wanted a hug a little tighter. Then he frowned. Wait, that doesn't make sense. These limbs are grabbing me from the other side. So he finally opened his eyes, only to see that it was Emily, snoring surprisingly cutely while hugging his body closely. He couldn't help but chuckle softly at the usually defiant girl for sleeping this way. Her head was on his shoulder, while his arm was wrapped around her, and all 4 of Emily's limbs were wrapped around him. Next, he looked to the other side and noticed Emma had already disappeared and left behind some burned ropes. I really need to figure out where all these ropes are coming from someday, he thought. Next, the door opened, and Emma walked in, wearing her maid outfit and carrying a tray with breakfast, including a cup of coffee. She smiled when she saw Eric awake and quickly put the tray on the bed beside him. "Good morning, sir. I made breakfast." Having handed the food off, she looked a little uncertain as she poked her fingers together cutely. "I hope it tastes good. It's just some leftovers from last night, since the only food that hasn't gone bad is in your storage. But I found some instant coffee that hadn't passed its expiration date yet." Eric grinned as this girl's cute and service-minded attitude once again delighted him. "I'm sure it tastes great, but as you can see, your sister is keeping my right hand occupied, so you'll have to feed me." Immediately, the girl went red in the face. Of course, sir." As she brought the first spoon to Eric's mouth, her feelings were apparent on her face. I'm feeding sir," she thought. The food was decent, but mostly Eric loved getting pampered while he watched Emma's ashamed happiness and couldn't help but keep a grin on his face. "It's delicious, mostly because it's you feeding me," he said, causing Emma to nearly faint. Thank you, sir." While she continued to feed him, she reported some things. "I checked up on Miss Astrid, and she appears to be doing well, but she hasn't woken up yet. There's also some people outside, but Miss Alora told me not to worry about them." This last news caused Eric to raise an eyebrow. "People, huh?" But then he shrugged. Well, if Alora said not to worry about them, then there's nothing to worry about. To which Emma shyly nodded. "Why, yes, sir," while she prepared his next bite. Meanwhile, he did ask Alora, who was currently in his soul, about those people. "Anything I should know?" The fairy answered with a casual mental shrug. "Not really. There's someone interesting among them, but you'll see soon enough. Either way, there's no hurry. They'll wait where they are like good little pets." Eric returned a mental nod. Fair enough. He wasn't really bothered with the specifics. Since Alora said there was no hurry, then that was good enough for him. Soon, the food and coffee were gone, so Eric pulled Emma into a kiss. "Thank you, Emma. I already don't know what I'd do without you." Emma smiled bright enough to blind the sun. "I'm glad, sir. I wouldn't want to be without you either." Meanwhile, next to Eric, Emily finally began to stir. She shifted and sniffed Eric's smell with a smile on her face before tightening her grip on his body, causing Eric to chuckle. Unfortunately, his chuckle seemed to fully wake her up. She suddenly opened her eyes wide and slowly looked between Eric's teasing grin, Emma's happy smile, and her own limbs wrapped around his body. Her face reddened, and she quickly scrambled to untangle herself and stand up. Soon, she stood beside the bed, still with a clearly embarrassed expression, and huffed. "I'm sure you're hoping I'll be embarrassed. Well, forget it," she said. "Why? Your body smells nice, and it's warm. This is a natural reaction." She pointed her finger at Eric accusingly. "Don't read anything into it." Eric nodded thoughtfully, but with a teasing glint in his eye. Sure. Natural reaction, while Emma gave her big sister a thumbs up and a bright smile. Emily palmed her face and groaned. "Whatever. I'm going for a shower." Eric watched the beautiful black-haired girl walk away with a grin on his face. She'll come around soon enough. Meanwhile, beside him, Emma seemed to have the same idea. "Don't worry, sir. You'll get her soon," she said with an encouraging smile. Eric raised an eyebrow at Emma's words and shook his head before patting the girl's silky white hair. "Never change, Emma. You always manage to surprise me." That said, he grinned and grabbed Emma's chin. "I haven't forgotten that I'm still supposed to punish you at your request." Emma trembled as a silly smile appeared on her face. "I'm ready, sir." Smirking and standing up from the bed, Eric nodded. "Good. We'll do that tonight then. For now, I have some guests to greet, apparently." Immediately, Alora appeared on his shoulder. "Finally done playing with the girls?" she asked with a smirk. Eric chuckled. "Don't give me that. You love watching me embarrass them while getting pampered." The fairy giggled. "Guilty as charged. Now, come on. Get your armor on and change to wolf form before you look outside." Despite being a little confused about the why, Eric didn't see a reason to refuse and did as she asked. He put on his still damaged armor, changed to wolf form and moved to the living room while Alora returned to his soul. He looked out the window next to the front door and noticed the 5 visitors who noticed him in return. The 5 people outside quickly scrambled to their feet and watched Eric through the window with wary gazes while beginning to talk amongst each other. Only one of these men and women actually drew his attention, however, causing him to smile warmly as a wave of relief flooded his body. "I see," he chuckled. "You want me to mess with him, don't you?" Alora giggled. "Kind of, yeah. You're pretty unrecognizable in werewolf form. After all, your new bloodlines have made your fur white instead of silver gray and given you several black lightning marks. Plus, I'm masking your scent. You should have no idea who you are." Eric raised his eyebrow. "Don't you think he's figured it out by now, though?" The fairy shrugged mentally. "Only if he actually thinks you are still alive somewhere like your mother might. If he's thought you dead for 7 years, he probably won't even consider it." Then, Alora got a little more serious. "But that's not the only reason. The fact is, it's been 7 years, and you don't know if he's still the same guy you knew. Not to mention that we're outnumbered here. If they actually decide to forget the diplomatic option, that barrier will maybe hold for a few hours, and then it will be you, Emily, and my sigils against 5 second-rank runebound. Even if we put Astrid's recovery at risk by waking her early, those are not ideal odds. Therefore, I think we should even the playing field before doing anything else. Just to be sure." Chuckling, Eric moved away from the window, under the wary eyes of the 5 people outside, and walked to the front door. "Well, I have always wanted to fight him and win." He moved his hammer from his storage to his hand and swung it over his shoulder before closing his eyes for a moment. Lightning then began to run across his body. About a minute later, he opened his eyes again and went through the door, swaggering outside. He took a deep breath of the crisp morning air and walked up to the barrier with a smug grin on his wolfish face. The 5 visitors had stopped talking and watched Eric approach with various gazes. It stayed surprisingly quiet as he came closer, since the sight of Eric in his black armor and large hammer was a little intimidating. Luckily, the armor's damage was barely noticeable. Yet, they couldn't help their gazes turning to surprise when they noticed Eric walk through the barrier unhindered and take a stand in front of them. Not because he could do that, but because he did. It was 5 against 1, after all. No one would have blamed him if he stayed on the other side of that barrier. "You're pretty cocky, aren't you?" Olaf growled. With his voice morphed from the transformation, Eric chuckled. "The only difference between cocky and confident is the ability to pull it off. So which am I?" He actually had no confidence in fighting all 5 of these people on his own, but he didn't expect this to end up in an all-out brawl. That said, he still had to be careful and see if he could get an advantage or even the odds. While Olaf scoffed at what he thought was apparent arrogance, Eric panned his gaze between the others gathered there. "Anyway, what can I do for you, gentlemen and ladies?"